My husband was in the shower when his phone lit up with a message that read, "Last night meant everything to me." I stared at the glowing screen on the bathroom counter, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. Without thinking, I picked up the device and texted back, "Come over. She is gone." 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and as I walked down the hallway, I instantly wished I had not done that. My name is Natalie, and I am 32 years old. Before grief and betrayal completely rewrote my existence, I thought I understood my place in the world. I thought I knew the man I had married, and I certainly thought I knew the limits of my family's cruelty. I was wrong on all counts. I opened the heavy oak front door of our Bellevue home, fully expecting to see a stranger, a nameless coworker, or some woman Spencer had met at a bar. Instead, standing on my porch, casually adjusting the belt of a beige trench coat that looked suspiciously like the one missing from my closet, was my 29-year-old sister Audrey. For a long moment, the only sound was the rushing of blood in my ears. Audrey did not look panicked. She did not gasp or try to hide her face. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, looked me up and down, and let out a soft, mocking laugh. She flipped a blonde curl over her shoulder and stepped right past me into the foyer as if she owned the place. "You still wear that cheap perfume?" she said, her nose crinkling in exaggerated disgust. Honestly, Natalie, no wonder Spencer had to run across the hall to my room last night. The casualness of her cruelty hit me like a physical blow. This was not just a mistake or a drunken lapse in judgment. This was a calculated invasion. But then again, Audrey had been invading my life since we were children. She was the undisputed golden child of the Addams family. If I had a toy she wanted, my parents made me hand it over to keep the peace. If I earned an award at school, Audrey would conveniently develop a mysterious illness that required all of our parents' attention, eclipsing my achievement entirely. She had taken my clothes, my friends, and my peace of mind for decades, and now she had come for my husband. I turned around slowly, gripping the edge of the entryway table to steady my shaking hands. "You have been sleeping with my husband under our parents' roof," I stated, the reality of the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Before Audrey could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the top of the stairs. Spencer walked down, a towel wrapped around his waist, vigorously drying his hair with a smaller towel. He froze halfway down the staircase when he saw the two of us standing in the foyer. I waited for the panic. I waited for the desperate apologies, the shame, the frantic backtracking that usually accompanies a spouse caught in the ultimate betrayal. Instead, Spencer let out a heavy sigh, tossed the small towel over the banister, and continued down the stairs with a look of sheer annoyance. He walked straight over to Audrey, wrapping a bare, damp arm around her waist and pulling her close. He looked at me with cold, hard eyes that held absolutely no remorse. "Well," he said, his voice flat and businesslike. "Good. Now we do not have to pretend anymore. I was going to kick you out this weekend anyway." The sheer audacity of his statement anchored my feet to the floor. "Kick me out." Spencer let go of Audrey and walked past me into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to casually inspect its contents as if he had not just detonated a bomb in the middle of our marriage. He pulled out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and took a long drink before turning back to face me. "Look at you, Natalie," Spencer scoffed, leaning against the marble island. "You are pathetic. You sit around in sweatpants all day, surfing the web for used furniture and random junk, contributing absolutely nothing to this household. I am a senior director. I need a woman who matches my status, someone who actually has ambition and vitality. You are just a parasite living off my paycheck." He was completely ignorant, of course. For the past 4 years, while Spencer thought I was aimlessly scrolling the internet, I had been building a highly lucrative real estate investment portfolio. I bought undervalued properties, renovated them, and flipped them for massive profits, all managed quietly through a corporate entity I had created. I let him pay the grocery bills because he insisted on being the traditional provider, but my private accounts held more money than he would see in a lifetime. I kept it hidden because in my family, any success I had was immediately commandeered or diminished. I thought I was protecting our marriage by letting him feel like the big man. What a spectacular miscalculation. Audrey strolled into the kitchen, wrapping her arms around Spencer from behind and resting her chin on his shoulder. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile and rubbed her hand over her flat stomach. Plus, she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial innocence. Spencer needs to think about his legacy. We are going to have a baby, Natalie. I am pregnant. The room seemed to tilt. My husband and my sister had not just been having an affair, they had created a life together while I was busy planning anniversary dinners and booking couples retreats. I looked at the two of them standing in my kitchen, a united front of betrayal expecting me to break down. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to fall to my knees and beg for an explanation. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the boring, inadequate older sister shatter into a million pieces. I refused to give them that satisfaction. I turned on my heel and walked up the stairs to our master bedroom. I could hear Spencer shouting after me, telling me to pack my trash and get out of his house. I pulled a medium-sized suitcase from the closet and randomly threw in whatever clothes were within arm's reach. I did not care what I was taking. I just needed to leave the toxic atmosphere of that house. As I zipped up the suitcase, my eyes fell on Spencer's nightstand. There, resting next to his expensive watch, were the keys to his beloved Porsche. He had bought it 3 months ago, claiming it was a necessary expense to project success to his clients. He loved that car more than he had ever loved me. I picked up the keys, the heavy metal cold against my palm, and slipped them into my pocket. I dragged my suitcase down the stairs. Spencer was waiting in the foyer, holding the front door wide open. He grabbed the handle of my suitcase, violently yanking it from my grip, and threw it out onto the front porch. The zipper split open on impact, spilling a pile of my sweaters and jeans across the concrete. "Do not come back, Natalie," he snarled. "I will have my lawyer send you the divorce papers by Monday. Make it easy on yourself and do not fight me in the house. You know you cannot afford a legal battle." I stepped out onto the porch, the chilly morning air hitting my face. I looked at my scattered clothes, then looked at the pristine, glossy black Porsche parked in the driveway. I walked slowly down the porch steps, ignoring my belongings. Spencer watched me from the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug grin plastered on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had completely destroyed me. I walked past his car, continuing down the driveway until I reached the edge of the street where the storm drain sat. I stopped, pulled his heavy car keys out of my pocket, and held them up in the air. Spencer's smug grin vanished instantly. "Hey!" he shouted, panic finally edging into his voice as he bolted out the front door, his towel slipping precariously. "What are you doing? Drop those right now." I looked him dead in the eye, opened my fingers, and let the keys drop. They fell with a satisfying metallic clink, disappearing instantly into the dark, murky water of the storm drain grid. Spencer screamed a string of profanities, sprinting barefoot across the wet grass toward the street, but it was too late. I calmly walked back to my suitcase, scooped up my spilled clothes, and headed toward my own modest sedan parked on the street. As I opened my car door, my cell phone began to ring loudly in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw my mother's name flashing on the screen. A tiny, foolish part of my broken heart flared with hope. Maybe Audrey had left a trail. Maybe my parents had figured out what was going on, and my mother was calling to check on me, to offer me a safe place to land. I answered the phone, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Mom." "Natalie, listen to me very carefully," my mother Diane said. Her voice was not warm. It was not comforting. It was sharp, cold, and entirely strictly business. "Audrey just texted us that everything is out in the open. You need to stop being difficult and accept the situation. Spencer is a successful man, and he and your sister have a real future together. Do not make a scene. Sign the divorce papers gracefully, and stop standing in the way of your sister's happiness." I sat frozen in the driver's seat, the phone pressed against my ear. My own mother knew. She knew my husband was sleeping with my sister. She knew her youngest daughter was pregnant by her son-in-law, and her only concern was making sure I stepped aside quietly so Audrey could upgrade her life without any social embarrassment. "How long have you known?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. "Long enough to know that this is the right path," my mother replied dismissively. Spencer needs a wife who can keep up with his career, not someone who hides in the house all day. We have a lawyer waiting at our house right now. Drive over here. We are going to get this paperwork sorted out today before you do anything spiteful." She hung up before I could say another word. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. For 32 years, I had swallowed their blatant favoritism. I had accepted the hand-me-down affection, the constant comparisons, the relentless message that I was simply a placeholder in the family until Audrey needed something. But this was an entirely new level of depravity. They were not just taking my husband, they were actively orchestrating my financial and emotional ruin to ensure Audrey got a comfortable happily ever after. I put the car in gear and drove toward my parents' sprawling estate in the neighboring affluent suburb. I did not drive there to surrender. I drove there because I needed to look them in the eye and witness the full extent of their betrayal. 20 minutes later, I walked through the massive double doors of my parents' home. I bypassed the formal living room and headed straight for my father's heavy mahogany study. As I pushed the doors open, I saw them. My father Richard was sitting behind his massive desk, his hands steepled in front of him. My mother sat on a velvet armchair to his right, sipping a cup of tea. Next to her sat a man in a sharp gray suit, a briefcase open on his lap, a stack of legal documents spread across the coffee table. "Sit down, Natalie," my father commanded, not offering a greeting, not asking how I was holding up after having my life blown apart. He pointed to a rigid wooden chair positioned directly in front of the lawyer. I remained standing, crossing my arms over my chest. "I think I prefer to stand for this." My father sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if my mere presence was an unbearable inconvenience. "Always so stubborn. Fine. Stand. But listen carefully. This is Philip, the family attorney. He has drawn up a preliminary separation agreement for you and Spencer. It is very straightforward. You will walk away amicably. You will not request alimony. And most importantly, you will relinquish any and all claims to the house in Bellevue." I stared at the three of them, absolutely appalled. "You want me to walk away with nothing and hand my home over to the man who cheated on me and the sister who helped him do it?" "The house is for Spencer and Audrey." My mother chimed in, setting her teacup down with a sharp clatter. "It is a beautiful property in a great school district. It is the perfect place for them to raise my grandchild. You have no business staying in a 4-bedroom house by yourself anyway. You ruined Audrey's prom at 18 when you refused to let her borrow your custom designer dress," my father snapped, leaning aggressively over his desk. "You embarrassed her in front of her friends because you were selfish. Are you trying to ruin her life now? Your sister is pregnant. She needs stability. Spencer is the provider, which means he keeps the primary residence. Sign the documents, Natalie. If you try to drag this out in court, I will write you out of the family legacy entirely. You will not see a single cent of the Adams estate when we are gone." The threat hung heavy in the air. In their minds, they held all the power. They believed I was a financially dependent, terrified woman who would crumble at the thought of losing her rich family's inheritance. They believed I needed Spencer's money and their future handouts to survive. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. I walked slowly over to the coffee table and picked up the thick stack of legal documents. I flipped through the pages, scanning the dense paragraphs, demanding that I forfeit my rights, my dignity, and my property to accommodate my sister's theft. When I reached the final page, I saw the signature line waiting for my capitulation. I picked up the expensive fountain pen resting on top of the briefcase. My mother smiled, a look of profound relief and triumph washing over her face. My father sat back in his chair, nodding his head in satisfaction. They thought they had broken me. I clicked the pen, pressed the tip to the paper, and signed my name with a fluid, sweeping motion. I tossed the pen back onto the table and looked up at my parents. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. "There," I said softly. "I signed it. I relinquish all marital claims to the property in Bellevue." "You made the right choice, Natalie," my father said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "It is best to leave quietly." I turned toward the door, my hand resting on the brass handle. "Oh, it will be quiet, Dad. But there is just one minor detail your lawyer might want to look into before Spencer and Audrey start picking out nursery paint colors. My mother frowned, her triumphant smile faltering. What are you talking about? I looked back at them, savoring the moment. I relinquished my marital claims to the house, but Spencer cannot claim it either. The house in Bellevue does not belong to me, and it certainly does not belong to my cheating husband. The lawyer looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. The deed is listed under a corporate entity, Nova Horizon LLC. Spencer informed us that it was a joint holding company. I let out a sharp, joyful laugh. Spencer is an idiot who signs documents without reading them. Nova Horizon LLC is a private real estate investment firm, and I am the sole owner, founder, and managing director. Spencer's name is nowhere on the corporate charter. He has zero legal right to the property. He is legally classified as a month-to-month tenant. My father's face was drained of color. He gripped the edge of his desk. You are lying. You do not have the capital to own a company like that. I opened the door, letting the hallway light spill into the dark study. I have a lot of things you do not know about, Dad. Enjoy the wedding planning, and tell Spencer he has 24 hours to vacate my property before I have the sheriff remove him for trespassing. I walked out of the house, leaving them in stunned, suffocating silence. The war had just begun, but I already held the winning hand. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown penthouse suite I had booked the night before. I had not shed a single tear since walking out of my parents' study. Instead, I ordered room service, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time to systematically dismantle the financial illusion Spencer had been living in for the past decade. For years, I allowed him to believe he was the primary provider. We kept a joint account where his paycheck was deposited, but what he willfully ignored was that my quiet real estate investments were the only reason that account never dipped below a comfortable six-figure buffer. I paid the property taxes, the insurance, the luxury car leases, and the exorbitant credit card bills he racked up trying to impress his colleagues. He liked to play the wealthy executive, and I let him, but the game was officially over. I logged into my secure banking portal and began the process of severing our digital ties. I transferred every cent of my personal funds into a highly restricted offshore account managed by Nova Horizon LLC. I left exactly $42.15 in our joint checking account, just enough to cover a cheap lunch. As I navigated to the credit card management tab, an alert flashed across the top right corner of my screen. A pending transaction had just been initiated on my primary platinum card. The location was a Cartier boutique in the city center. The amount was a staggering $45,000. A cold smile spread across my face. Spencer and Audrey were out shopping for an engagement ring. He was standing in a high-end jewelry store less than 24 hours after destroying our marriage, attempting to buy my sister a diamond using my money. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. I could picture the scene perfectly. Audrey leaning against the glass display cases, pointing a manicured finger at the largest stone, while Spencer handed over the metal card bearing my name, acting like the ultimate big spender. I clicked the transaction detail. The authorization was currently pending, waiting for network approval. I moved my cursor over the bold red button labeled Report Card Stolen and Freeze Account. I pressed down on the trackpad. The screen refreshed, displaying a green checkmark indicating the action was successful. The card was dead. The account was locked. I leaned back against the plush hotel pillows and waited. I knew Spencer's temper. I knew his desperate need to maintain appearances. It would not take long. Exactly 3 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate violently on the nightstand. Spencer's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. I wanted him to sweat under the judgmental gaze of the Cartier sales associates. I wanted Audrey to feel the hot sting of public humiliation. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. I picked it up and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "What the hell did you just do, you scheming bitch?" Spencer roared into the receiver. His voice echoed with a mixture of raw panic and unfiltered rage. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Spencer. Do not play games with me, Natalie." He hissed, his voice dropping an octave as if he was trying to hide his outburst from the people around him. I am standing at the checkout counter at Cartier, and the terminal just declined the card. The manager had the nerve to tell me the account has been flagged for fraud and locked. Unfreeze it right now. You are embarrassing me. I let out a soft, airy laugh. I am not embarrassing you, Spencer. Your lack of actual wealth is embarrassing you. You tried to buy an engagement ring for your pregnant mistress, who also happens to be my sister, using my credit line. Did you honestly think I would finance your happily ever after? In the background, I could hear the unmistakable sound of Audrey whining. Her voice was shrill and pierced right through the phone speaker. Spencer did something she cried out, sounding on the verge of a full-blown tantrum. The saleslady is looking at us like we are criminals. Everyone in the store is staring. Just give them another card. I want this ring. It is mine. I do not have another card. Audrey Spencer snapped at her before turning his attention back to me. Listen to me, Natalie. You are going to log into the app and lift the restriction this second. That is a joint account. Half of that credit line belongs to me. I have every right to use it. You might want to review the fine print on that platinum card, Spencer, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and ice cold. You are merely an authorized user on my account. An account I just permanently closed. Your privileges have been revoked. I suggest you check your personal checking account to see if you can cover a $45,000 diamond. Though from what I recall, your balance barely covers your golf club membership dues. Spencer let out a sound that was half growl, half strangled gasp. The facade of the powerful tech executive was shattering right in the middle of a luxury boutique. Audrey's complaints grew louder in the background. She was practically stomping her feet. Spencer, this is so humiliating, she shrieked. You promised me the 3-carat emerald cut. You said money was not an issue. Why is your stupid ex-wife declining the card? Fix it. Shut up, Audrey Spencer yelled, completely losing his composure. I could hear the muffled apologies he offered to the store employees. I am so sorry, there has been a bank error. Just give me one moment to contact my financial manager. He walked away from the counter, his footsteps echoing on the hard marble floor of the store. He brought the phone closer to his mouth, his breathing heavy and ragged. You think this is funny, Natalie, he sneered. You think making me look like a fool in public makes you the winner. You think a few frozen plastic cards and some locked bank accounts are going to break me. I think it is a remarkably good start, I said calmly. Enjoy paying for your new life on your own dime. Oh, and do not forget the moving trucks. You have about 14 hours left to vacate my property in Bellevue before I send the police to escort you and your new fiancé off the premises. You are nothing, Spencer spat viciously. You have always been nothing. A boring, pathetic woman who hides behind a computer screen. You think taking away my access to your little savings account scares me? You think a few pennies matter to a man in my position. I reached out with my left hand and tapped the screen of my laptop, opening a hidden audio recording application. I hit the red circle to begin capturing the call. I needed him to keep talking. Spencer's biggest weakness had always been his fragile ego. Whenever he felt cornered or emasculated, he would boast and brag to inflate his own self-worth. I just needed to push the right button. You are right, Spencer, I said, adopting a tone of mock sympathy. You are a senior director. You are a big shot. So why are you throwing a tantrum over a declined card? If you are so wealthy, why do not you just write them a personal check for the diamond? Unless, of course, you are completely broke. The bait worked flawlessly. His ego flared, completely blinding his rational judgment. Broke, he laughed, a dark, arrogant sound that translated perfectly over the recorded audio. I am far from broke, Natalie. You really think I rely on your pathetic little real estate hobby to fund my lifestyle? You have no idea what kind of money I have access to. I just pulled $200,000 from the company development fund yesterday afternoon. Untraceable cash. I am sitting on a gold mine while you are playing petty revenge games with credit cards. My heart gave a sudden hard thump against my ribs. I stared at the audio waveforms bouncing on my laptop screen, perfectly capturing every single syllable of his confession. He had not just cheated. He was actively embezzling corporate funds from his employer, a massive publicly traded technology firm. He was committing federal financial crimes to sustain his illusion of grandeur. "Wow, Spencer," I murmured, ensuring my voice sounded suitably intimidated to keep him talking. $200,000. That is a lot of money to move around without anyone noticing. They will never notice, he bragged, his confidence fully restored now that he thought he had put me in my place. I am the one who approves the departmental budget allocations. It is a foolproof system. So go ahead, Natalie. Cancel the cards. Keep the house. Audrey and I are going to take my capital and buy an estate twice as large. You just did me a favor by cutting the cord. In the background, I heard Audrey's voice approaching again. Spencer, the manager, says we need to step outside if we cannot provide a valid form of payment, Spencer told her loudly before returning to the receiver. Watch your back, Natalie. I am going to hire the most aggressive divorce attorney in the state. I will drag you through court until you are bleeding money. You messed with the wrong man. He hung up the phone. The line went dead. I sat in the quiet luxury of the hotel room staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. I reached out and clicked the stop button on the recording software. I saved the audio file, encrypting it immediately and uploading it to 2 separate secure cloud servers. Spencer thought he had issued a terrifying threat. He thought he had proven his superiority and secured his future with Audrey. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy his entire life. The infidelity, the betrayal, the cruelty from my parents, all of it was personal. But embezzling $200,000 from a major corporation, that was federal fraud. My phone vibrated again on the desk. This time it was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was from. I had reached out to him late last night asking for an emergency meeting. The message was brief and to the point. I am at the coffee shop across the street from your hotel. Bring your laptop. We need to talk. I smiled, grabbing my coat and my computer. It was time to meet my brother-in-law, Jamal. It was time to turn this family tragedy into a beautifully orchestrated demolition. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the corner coffee shop, the bell chiming softly above my head. The morning rush had died down, leaving only a few patrons scattered among the leather booths. I spotted them immediately in a secluded corner booth, my oldest sister Nicole and her husband Jamal. Nicole stood up the second she saw me, her expression a mix of fierce protectiveness and deep empathy. She wrapped her arms tightly around my shoulders, pulling me into a hug that felt like the first genuine moment of safety I had experienced in 24 hours. Unlike Audrey, who thrived on our parents' toxic approval, Nicole had stepped away from the family drama years ago. She married Jamal, a brilliant African-American forensic accountant, and built a quiet, stable life entirely independent of our parents' financial manipulation. Sit down, Nat, Nicole said, pulling back to look at my face. You look exhausted but surprisingly victorious. Tell me you did not just let them roll over you. I slid into the booth across from them, setting my laptop on the wooden table. I did not let them do anything. In fact, Spencer just gave me the exact leverage I need. Jamal pushed his half-empty coffee mug aside and adjusted his glasses. He always had an analytical, intense energy about him, the kind of guy who could find a hidden bank account faster than a detective could find a fingerprint. He opened his own laptop, the screen reflecting in his dark eyes. You said you had a recording, Jamal stated, his voice low and strictly professional. Let us hear it. I have been pulling some strings on my end since you called me last night, but I need to know exactly what he admitted to. I opened my laptop, entered my encryption password, and pulled up the audio file I had saved just minutes ago. I turned the screen slightly toward them and hit play. Spencer's arrogant, sneering voice filled the small space between us. I just pulled $200,000 from the company development fund yesterday afternoon. Untraceable cash. I am sitting on a gold mine while you are playing petty revenge games with credit cards. Nicole gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Her eyes darted from the screen to me. Did he just confess to federal embezzlement on a recorded line? He did, I replied, closing the laptop with a satisfying click. He was angry because I froze my platinum card while he was trying to buy Audrey a Cartier engagement ring. His ego could not handle the public embarrassment, so he had to brag about his stolen wealth to put me in my place. Jamal let out a low whistle, shaking his head as a sharp, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. Spencer always was the dumbest guy in the room who thought he was the smartest. I warned your parents about him 5 years ago, Nat. I looked at his tax returns once when your dad asked for some casual advice. The numbers never matched his lavish lifestyle. But your parents refused to listen. They told me I just did not understand tech industry compensation. Because he wore designer suits and drove a Porsche. Nicole added, her tone dripping with disgust. Mom and Dad care more about the illusion of success than actual integrity. They thought Spencer was going to elevate the Addams family name. They practically worshipped him. Jamal leaned forward, intertwining his fingers on the table. He is not just stealing from his company, Natalie. That audio file is the smoking gun, but the bomb has already been ticking. I spent the entire night running a deep background check on Spencer's financial footprint. As a certified fraud examiner, I have access to databases your husband does not even know exist. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did you find? Jamal turned his laptop toward me. The screen was filled with complex spreadsheets, highlighted transaction records, and corporate registry documents. He tapped a specific column of numbers. Spencer has been siphoning money from his employer for at least 14 months, Jamal explained, pointing to a series of recurring wire transfers. He exploits a loophole in their vendor payment system. He approves invoices for dummy corporations that provide non-existent software consulting services. The company pays the invoices, and the money gets funneled into offshore accounts. I stared at the staggering numbers. He is stealing millions. Nearly 3 million so far, Jamal confirmed. But here is where it gets incredibly personal, Natalie. He is not just stealing from the tech firm. He is bleeding your parents dry. I froze my eyes, snapping up to meet Jamal's serious gaze. What do you mean my parents are wealthy? They have a massive retirement portfolio. They had a massive retirement portfolio, Nicole corrected softly, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Jamal found the mortgage filings this morning. Jamal brought up a new document on his screen. It was a property deed with multiple banking liens attached. 3 months ago, your father and mother took out a massive second mortgage on their primary estate and completely liquidated their mutual funds. They transferred $1.5 million directly to a private investment firm controlled by Spencer. I felt the blood drain from my face. The absolute audacity of it was staggering. When I went to their house this morning, my father threatened to write me out of his will if I did not hand my house over to Audrey and Spencer. He acted like he held the keys to the kingdom. He is holding the keys to a sinking ship, Jamal said flatly. Spencer convinced your parents that he had exclusive access to a pre-IPO tech startup. He promised them a guaranteed triple return on their investment. He played on their greed and their desperate need to brag to their country club friends. Your parents gave him their entire nest egg, Natalie. And Spencer took that money to pay off his massive gambling debts and fund his luxury lifestyle. I sat back against the leather booth, trying to process the magnitude of the deception. My parents were completely bankrupt, living on borrowed time and borrowed money, yet they still had the nerve to demand I sign away my only asset to accommodate my cheating husband. They had traded their loyal, hardworking daughter for a charismatic con artist who was actively ruining them. They deserve it, I said, the words feeling heavy but entirely true. They literally sold me out to protect the man who is robbing them blind. Oh, it gets so much worse, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He tapped his keyboard again, pulling up a confidential corporate registry file. Spencer's tech company is not stupid. The finance department noticed the discrepancies in the vendor payments 2 weeks ago. They have quietly launched an internal audit. The walls are closing in on him, and Spencer knows it. He knows the federal investigators will be knocking on his door any day now. So why is he throwing an engagement party? I asked, genuinely confused by Spencer's reckless behavior. Why is he buying Cartier rings and demanding my house if he knows he is about to be arrested? Because he needs a fall guy, Nicole interjected, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and horror. Or in this case, a fall girl. Jamal slid a printed document across the table, pushing it directly in front of me. It was a business registration form filed with the state. I looked down at the highlighted text, my breath catching in my throat. Look at the names on the dummy corporations receiving the embezzled corporate funds, Jamal instructed. I scanned the paperwork. The primary receiving entity was listed as Apex Solutions, LLC. I moved my eyes down to the ownership section. The sole registered proprietor, the person legally responsible for the bank accounts receiving millions of dollars in stolen corporate funds, was not Spencer. It was Audrey. Spencer did not just buy your sister a few nice dinners and a designer coat, Jamal explained, tapping the paper with his index finger. He manipulated her into signing the incorporation papers for his shell companies. He likely told her it was for tax purposes or some brilliant investment strategy. Audrey loves feeling like a savvy businesswoman, so she probably signed exactly where he told her to without reading a single page. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. The money is sitting in accounts with Audrey's name on them. Exactly, Jamal confirmed. When the internal auditors at the tech firm finish their investigation, they are not going to find Spencer's signature on the receiving end of the theft. They are going to find your sister. Spencer is setting Audrey up to take the entire fall for the federal embezzlement charges. He plans to claim she orchestrated the vendor fraud without his knowledge. Nicole leaned back, crossing her arms. Audrey thought she won the lottery by stealing your husband. She thinks she is getting a wealthy tech executive and a free house. She has no idea she is currently the prime suspect in a massive federal financial crime. I stared at the document, the reality of my sister's impending doom washing over me. Audrey had betrayed me in the most intimate, humiliating way possible. She had stood in my foyer wearing my coat, mocking my pain, while carrying my husband's child. She had happily participated in my destruction, but she was walking right into a trap that would end with her spending the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary, while Spencer likely planned to flee the country with my parents' retirement money. So what is our move? Jamal asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. I have the financial records. You have the audio confession. We have enough evidence to walk into the FBI field office right now and blow this entire thing wide open. We can have Spencer in handcuffs by dinner time. I looked at the audio file saved on my desktop, then at the fraudulent business registration bearing my sister's name. A slow, calculating energy settled deep in my chest. If we went to the authorities right now, it would be quick. It would be clinical. But it would not be a reckoning. My family had humiliated me publicly. They had plotted my downfall with cruel precision. They needed to experience the exact same level of absolute devastation. No, I said quietly, closing the folder and sliding it back to Jamal. We are not going to the police today. Spencer thinks he has won. My parents think they have secured their golden future. They are planning to host a massive engagement party for Spencer and Audrey tomorrow night to show off to their high society friends. I looked at Nicole, then at Jamal, my decision firm and resolute. We are going to let them host that party. We are going to let them invite every single important person they know. And then we are going to deliver our engagement gift. Jamal let out a dark, appreciative chuckle, snapping his laptop shut. I will start preparing the financial dossiers. We are going to need plenty of copies. Nicole smiled, a fierce, protective glint in her eye. What do you need me to do, Nat? I picked up my coffee cup, my hands perfectly steady. Get your best dress ready, Nicole. We have a family dinner to attend, and I plan on serving the main course. The invitation arrived exactly 2 hours later, via a stiffly worded text message from my mother. It demanded my presence at Le Domaine, an obscenely expensive Michelin-starred French restaurant located in the heart of the city financial district. The message claimed they wanted to discuss a peaceful family resolution over dinner. I knew exactly what kind of resolution they had in mind. They wanted my submission. They wanted my money. I arrived at the restaurant precisely at 7 o'clock. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of imported truffles, rich buttery sauces, and suffocating pretension. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the velvet booths and pristine white tablecloths. I handed my coat to the hostess and scanned the dining room. Seated at a discreet corner table partially obscured by a massive floral arrangement were Nicole and Jamal. They had arrived 20 minutes early. Nicole caught my eye and offered a subtle, encouraging lift of her martini glass. They were my silent audience, my witnesses to the absolute destruction of the Addams family facade. I turned my attention to the center of the room. My parents, Richard and Diane, were seated at the best table in the house. My father wore a bespoke tailored suit, while my mother draped herself in designer silk, a new diamond tennis necklace glittering aggressively against her collarbone. They looked like the epitome of wealth and success. But thanks to Jamal, I knew they were nothing more than bankrupt frauds sitting on a mountain of debt. I walked over and took my seat across from them. Neither of them stood to greet me. There were no hugs, no apologies for the horrific events of the previous 48 hours. Natalie, my father, began his tone artificially cordial. Glad you decided to be reasonable and join us. I folded my hands in my lap, offering a polite, empty smile. I am always a reasonable dad. I am curious to hear what you have to say. Before the conversation could go any further, the sommelier approached our table. My father did not even glance at the wine list. He confidently ordered a vintage Bordeaux that I knew cost upwards of $800 a bottle. My mother followed suit by ordering the imported caviar tasting board, the Wagyu beef tartare, and a spread of artisan cheeses. They were racking up a massive bill with the casual arrogance of people who believed their bank accounts were overflowing. I ordered a simple mineral water and a small house salad. Are you sure that is all you want? My mother asked, her nose crinkling in mild disgust. We are celebrating tonight. You do not have to be so painfully frugal. I am perfectly fine, I replied, taking a sip of my water. So tell me what exactly we are celebrating. My father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He clasped his hands together, adopting his best authoritative business persona. We are celebrating a new chapter for this family, Natalie. It has been a stressful few days, but your mother and I have spoken extensively with Spencer. He is a good man who made a complicated choice, but he is committed to doing the right thing by Audrey and the baby. The right thing, I echoed, keeping my voice completely neutral. You mean moving his pregnant mistress into the house I paid for? My mother sighed, waving her hand dismissively, as if I had just brought up a minor inconvenience. Oh, Natalie, do not be so dramatic. That house is much too large for a single woman anyway. Spencer and Audrey need the space to raise our grandchild. We are here to talk about logistics, not emotions. The waiter arrived, placing the extravagant caviar spread between them. My parents eagerly began serving themselves, completely unbothered by the fact that they had actively participated in the destruction of my marriage. Spencer mentioned something very interesting to us this afternoon. My father continued, expertly spreading caviar onto a toast point. He said you have been keeping secrets from your own husband. He told us about Nova Horizon LLC. He mentioned that you have a substantial amount of liquid assets hidden away in personal savings and investment accounts. I watched him chew, swallow, and take a long sip of his overpriced wine. He was completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging above his head. He thought he was closing a corporate merger. Is that so? I murmured. And why would Spencer be discussing my private finances with you? Because we are a family, Natalie. My mother chimed in, her tone sickeningly sweet. And right now, your sister needs our full support. Spencer is under a lot of stress at his corporate job. Audrey is planning a wedding while pregnant. They need to furnish the Bellevue estate and ensure the baby has a proper trust fund set up. I set my fork down, staring at them in absolute disbelief. The sheer magnitude of their entitlement was almost hypnotic. You want me to fund my cheating husband's wedding to my sister? We want you to contribute your fair share to the family legacy. My father corrected, his voice hardening into a demand. You have been hoarding capital while your sister is trying to build a life. We had Philip, our attorney, draft up a simple transfer authorization form. My father reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded legal document, sliding it across the pristine white tablecloth. We need the login credentials, the account routing numbers, and your signature authorizing the transfer of your personal savings into the family trust, my father dictated. Spencer will manage the funds from there to ensure Audrey's wedding and the new baby are properly taken care of. It is the least you can do after treating your sister so poorly and causing all this unnecessary drama. I looked down at the paper. They had actually printed out a form demanding I surrender my entire net worth to the man who was currently embezzling millions and setting their golden child up for federal prison. I looked up, catching Nicole's eye across the restaurant. She was shaking her head in silent disgust. I pushed the document back across the table. No. My father frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. Excuse me. I said no. I repeated, enunciating the words slowly and clearly. I am not giving you my passwords. I am not transferring a single cent to your trust. And I am certainly not financing a lavish wedding for two backstabbing parasites. My mother slammed her wineglass down onto the table. The sharp crack of crystal against wood echoed through the quiet dining room. Several patrons at nearby tables turned their heads to look at us. "How dare you speak to us this way?" she hissed, her face flushing an angry mottled red. "You have always been so selfish, Natalie. From the time you were a little girl, you never wanted to share. You hide your money, you hide your success, and you sit there looking down on your sister who is finally finding true love." True love. I laughed at a genuine sharp sound that cut through the tension. He is a corporate fraud, Mom. He is using you, using Audrey, and he tried to use me. You are a bitter, cold-blooded monster. My mother shrieked, her voice rising in pitch, drawing even more attention from the surrounding tables. You are just jealous of your sister's happiness. You are terrified because Audrey got the successful man and the beautiful baby, while you are destined to die alone. Without warning, my mother reached across the table, grabbed her heavy crystal water glass, and hurled the contents directly at my face. The ice-cold water hit me with a shocking slap, splashing across my cheeks, soaking my hair, and dripping down the front of my silk blouse. The entire restaurant plunged into a dead, stunned silence. The clinking of silverware stopped. Waiters froze in their tracks. I could see the maitre d' rushing toward our table from the corner of my eye. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice. I calmly reached for the linen napkin resting on my lap and brought it up to my face, elegantly dabbing the cold water from my skin. I dried my eyelashes, wiped the moisture from my chin, and placed the damp napkin neatly beside my plate. My parents stared at me, breathing heavily, expecting me to break down crying or throw a tantrum. They wanted me to act hysterical so they could play the victims. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I raised my hand and signaled for our waiter, who was standing a few feet away looking absolutely horrified. He hurried over holding a small leather folio. "Check, please." I asked, my voice to be perfectly steady and polite. The waiter hastily placed the leather folio on the table. I opened it and glanced at the total. With the vintage wine, the caviar, the expensive entrees, and the dessert they had preemptively ordered, the bill came to exactly $4,250. I pulled my black solid metal credit card from my purse and handed it to the waiter. "Please charge exactly $45 to this card to cover my sparkling water and my side salad." I instructed him clearly, ensuring my parents heard every word. "The remaining $4,205 will be paid by the gentleman sitting across from me." The waiter nodded, nervously processed my card on his handheld terminal, and handed it back to me with a receipt. My father's face was drained of color. He stared at the leather folio resting on the table as if it were a live grenade. "Natalie, you cannot be serious," he stammered, his voice dropping into a panicked whisper. "I did not bring my wallet. Spencer usually handles these dinners." "That is unfortunate, Dad," I said, standing up from the table and smoothing down my damp skirt. "Because Spencer's cards are currently frozen for fraud. You might want to wash some dishes in the back if you cannot cover the check." My mother looked around frantically, realizing that the entire restaurant was watching them, including several prominent members of their country club sitting a few tables away. Natalie does not walk away from us, she demanded, trying to keep her voice low, but failing miserably. "You pay this bill right now. We are a family." I picked up my purse and looked down at them. They looked so small and pathetic, sitting behind their luxurious feast with absolutely no way to pay for it. I paused, turning back to look my father dead in the eye. I let a cold, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. You said your retirement fund has been highly profitable lately thanks to Spencer, right? I asked, my voice carrying clearly through the silent dining room. Remember to check if the bank sends an asset freeze notice tomorrow morning. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, the sound of my heels clicking confidently against the hardwood floor. As I passed Nicole and Jamal's table, they both raised their martini glasses in a silent, victorious salute. The war was escalating, and I had just fired a massive, devastating shot. I returned to my penthouse suite where Jamal and Nicole were already waiting. Jamal had connected my laptop to the massive flat-screen television mounted on the living room wall. The screen was divided into a grid displaying the live high-definition feeds from the exterior and entryway security cameras I had discreetly upgraded at the Bellevue estate months ago. Tonight was the night of Spencer and Audrey's grand engagement and housewarming party. It was meant to be their ultimate victory lap. Through the crystal-clear video feed, I watched the caterers carry silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres through my kitchen. A string quartet was set up in the corner of the formal living room, playing soft classical music. Spencer was holding court by the marble fireplace, holding a glass of champagne and wearing a custom-tailored velvet blazer. Audrey clung to his arm, draped in a white silk gown that clung tightly to her figure, ensuring every guest noticed her pregnancy. She threw her head back, laughing at a joke made by one of Spencer's corporate colleagues, acting entirely like the lady of the manor. My parents had arrived 20 minutes earlier. Through the camera audio, I could hear the sharp edge of panic beneath their forced social pleasantries. Their credit cards had been declined all morning. Their bank accounts were frozen, and the reality of their complete financial ruin was slowly suffocating them. Yet there they were, sipping free champagne and pretending they still ruled the world. I checked my watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Right on time, Jamal murmured, leaning forward on the hotel sofa and crossing his arms. Watch the front gate feed. On the top left square of the screen, a heavy county sheriff cruiser pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the estate. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the pristine landscaping. A second cruiser pulled up directly behind it. Two uniformed deputies stepped out, adjusting their utility belts and walking purposefully up the long paved driveway. This is going to be incredibly satisfying, Nicole whispered, a savage smile lighting up her face. The heavy brass knocker echoed loudly over the audio feed, slicing right through the elegant string music playing inside. On the entryway camera, I watched Spencer's annoyed expression. He handed his champagne flute to Audrey and marched toward the heavy oak door, muttering under his breath about incompetent valet drivers and noise complaints. He yanked the front door open, projecting his chest outward in his best intimidating executive posture. "Can I help you?" Spencer snapped, not even bothering to offer a polite greeting. "We are hosting a private event here. If this is about the parking situation on the street, my valet company has already secured the proper permits." The lead deputy, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a completely unbedded expression, stepped onto the welcome mat. He did not look intimidated in the slightest. "Are you Spencer Hayes?" Spencer confirmed, crossing his arms over his chest. "Who is asking, and why are you interrupting my engagement party? State your business and make it quick. I have important guests waiting inside." The deputy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick folded legal document. "I am Sheriff Miller with the County Civil Division. I am here to serve an official court-ordered notice of eviction." Spencer let out a loud, abrasive laugh that echoed through the foyer. Several guests holding their drinks began to turn around, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the uniforms. Audrey walked up behind Spencer, placing a protective hand on his shoulder and glaring at the deputies. "Eviction." Spencer scoffed, shaking his head as if the sheriff had just told a terrible joke. "You have clearly got the wrong address, officer. I am the owner of this estate. I am a senior director at a major technology firm. I do not get evicted. You need to leave my property right now before I call your precinct captain and have your badge for harassment." The deputy did not move a single inch. He slowly unfolded the heavy document, holding it up so the porch light illuminated the thick black text and the official county seal stamped at the bottom. "There is no mistake, Mr. Hayes," the deputy stated, his voice carrying a calm, authoritative weight that cut through Spencer's bluster. This property is legally registered and owned in full by a corporate entity named Nova Horizon, LLC. According to the court filings and the housing registry, you are classified as a month-to-month tenant. A tenant? Audrey shrieked, her voice pitching upward in disbelief. She stepped out from behind Spencer, pointing a manicured finger at the officers. We are not tenants. Spencer owns this house. Tell them, Spencer. Tell them to get off our porch right now. Spencer's arrogant smirk began to falter. The color slowly drained from his face as his eyes darted across the bold legal jargon printed on the page. He reached out and snatched the paper from the deputy's hand, his eyes scanning the paragraphs frantically. This is fraudulent, Spencer barked, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his rising panic. My name is on the marital asset documents. I live here. I have lived here for years. Living here does not equate to holding the deed, the deputy replied smoothly. Furthermore, the property owner has provided extensive bank records proving that you have failed to contribute to the lease agreement for the past 90 days. You are 3 months delinquent on your rent, Mr. Hayes. The judge reviewed the evidence this morning and signed the emergency eviction order immediately. The guests in the foyer had gone completely silent. The string quartet in the living room stopped playing. The entire party was now staring at the front door, watching the supposedly wealthy tech executive being publicly humiliated by county law enforcement. My parents pushed their way to the front of the crowd, my father's face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Spencer, what is the meaning of this? My father demanded, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Why are the police talking about unpaid rent? You told me you owned this estate free and clear. I do own it, Spencer shouted, whirling around to face my father, his eyes wide and frantic. It is a corporate holding structure. It is a tax loophole. There has been a clerical error with the bank. Spencer turned back to the deputies, pointing a shaking finger directly at the lead officer's chest. Listen to me very carefully. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I am going to call my attorneys. I am going to sue you for trespassing, and I am going to sue this phantom landlord for harassment. I will drag Nova Horizon, LLC, through the courts until they are begging for mercy. Give me the contact information for this management company right now. The sheriff let out a heavy sigh, looking at Spencer with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. He reached out, taking the document back from Spencer's trembling hands. He slowly flipped the thick stack of papers to the very last page, tapping his pen against the bold printed name on the ownership disclosure line. You can call whoever you want, sir, the deputy said, his voice echoing clearly through the silent, crowded foyer. But you might not have to look very far to serve those lawsuits. Spencer stared at the paper. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the reality of his situation finally crashed down upon him. The sole owner and managing director of Nova Horizon, LLC, is Natalie Adams, the deputy announced, ensuring every single guest heard the name perfectly. She is the legal landlord of this estate, and according to this court order, she has generously granted you exactly 24 hours to pack your belongings and vacate the premises. If you and your guests are not off this property by tomorrow night, my officers will return to physically remove you and seal the doors. Have a good evening, Mr. Hayes. The silence that followed the deputy's departure was absolute. Spencer stood frozen in the foyer of my Bellevue estate, the eviction notice trembling in his hands. The lavish engagement party dissolved into a frantic, humiliated exodus. Within 24 hours, Spencer and Audrey were dragging their hastily packed suitcases out of my driveway, their grand societal debut crushed under the weight of an emergency court order. With his credit cards frozen and his corporate accounts under federal audit, Spencer had nowhere luxurious to go. Through Jamal's extensive network of forensic accounting contacts and private investigators, I knew exactly where my soon-to-be ex-husband had landed. He was pacing the stained, threadbare carpet of a dilapidated roadside motel on the city's industrial outskirts. I was sitting comfortably in my newly reclaimed living room, sipping hot chamomile tea while Jamal synced his laptop to my television. He had tapped into the public network of the motel and intercepted Spencer's digital communications. We were watching the spectacular implosion of Spencer Hayes in real time. He is cornered, Jamal said, his eyes scanning the data scrolling across his screen. The tech firm officially terminated him this morning. The feds are building their embezzlement case. But Spencer's immediate problem is not the government. It is the underground sports betting syndicate he owes $500,000 to. I watched the intercepted text messages flash across Jamal's monitor. Spencer was frantically trying to hire a sleazy, disbarred attorney known for vicious, underhanded litigation. Spencer's plan was predictably malicious. He intended to file an emergency injunction against Nova Horizon LLC, claiming that because the company was managed during our marriage, he was legally entitled to half its assets under community property laws. He wanted to drain my accounts to pay off his criminal debts. But he needed capital to initiate the hostile legal takeover. He needed a retainer fee he simply did not possess. Through the audio feed Jamal had secured via Spencer's compromised burner phone, the miserable reality of their motel room echoed through my living room speakers. Audrey was weeping loudly, her voice grating and shrill, as she complained about the smell of stale smoke and cheap bleach. "Spencer, I cannot stay here," Audrey sobbed. "I am pregnant. The bed feels damp. You told me we were moving into an estate. You promised me a luxury nursery. Call your finance guy. Get the money." "Stop whining, Audrey." Spencer snapped, his voice vibrating with frantic, barely contained rage. "I am fixing it. Natalie thinks she is a genius hiding her money in a corporate shell, but she made a fatal error. We are still legally married. Half of that company is mine. I just need you to sign some authorization forms so my lawyer can file the asset seizure paperwork tomorrow morning." I leaned forward on my sofa, listening intently. This was Spencer's signature move. He was a predator who thrived on the blind trust of naive women. He had tried the exact same tactic with me 6 months after our wedding. We were sitting at our kitchen table packing for a weekend getaway when he slid a dense stack of heavily worded legal documents across the marble island. He tapped his expensive pen against the signature line, claiming they were routine joint tax declarations that needed to be filed before his afternoon golf game. He rushed me, applying pressure acting, annoyed that I would even hesitate. But I had actually read the fine print. They were not tax documents. They were unconditional lines of credit listing my personal savings as the sole collateral for a massive business loan to fund his sports car obsession. That was the precise moment the illusion of my marriage shattered. It was the moment I realized I had married a financial parasite. I refused to sign, and the very next week I quietly founded Nova Horizon LLC with an airtight, impenetrable asset protection trust. I built a fortress he could never breach. Audrey, however, entirely lacked that survival instinct. She was desperate to maintain the illusion of being a wealthy executive's pampered wife. "Just sign here and here," Spencer instructed over the audio feed, the sound of paper rustling filling the quiet room. "It gives my legal team the authority to access the frozen marital funds. Once this is filed, we will have millions. We will buy a house twice the size of Natalie's." "Are you sure this will work?" Audrey sniffled, the scratching of a pen indicating she was already complying. "I am positive," Spencer boasted, his ego inflating the moment he secured her submission. "Natalie is an amateur playing in a major league. By tomorrow afternoon, we will have her entire portfolio locked down." Jamal paused the audio, pulling up a digital copy of the documents Spencer had just emailed to his associates. Jamal's eyes widened, and he let out a low, breathless whistle. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of awe and absolute horror. "Spencer did not hire a divorce attorney," Jamal said flatly, projecting the document onto the television screen. "He is not trying to sue you for Nova Horizon LLC. He knows that trust is bulletproof." I stared at the paperwork, my eyes scanning the harsh, unforgiving legal text. "What did she just sign?" "Jamal." Jamal pointed to the bold heading at the top of the page. "Spencer just brokered a deal with the underground loan sharks he owes money to. He convinced them to give him a 30-day extension on his gambling debts by providing a new clean guarantor. The papers Audrey just blindly signed were not marital asset claims. They were unconditional personal liability guarantees." My jaw tightened. Spencer had legally bound my sister to a ruthless criminal syndicate. He used her name, Jamal continued, his voice grim. She just legally accepted full responsibility for his $500,000 underground debt. If Spencer defaults, which he absolutely will, the mob does not go after him. They go after Audrey. She just made herself a target for violent extortionists. I hit play on the audio feed again. Spencer was audibly exhaling a sigh of massive, triumphant relief. He thought he had just bought himself time to flee. He thought he had outsmarted the criminals and secured his escape route using my sister as a human shield. Then a heavy rhythmic pounding echoed through the audio feed. It was not the polite knock of a motel manager. It was the aggressive, commanding strike of someone who intended to break the door down. Spencer's voice wavered. "Who is it?" "Open the door, Hayes," a deep, gravelly voice demanded from the other side of the thin motel door. "We know you are in there. We are here to collect the guarantee." Audrey let out a terrified shriek. "Spencer, who is that? What is going on?" Spencer's breathing became shallow and erratic. The sound of the deadbolt clicking echoed sharply. The door creaked open, followed immediately by the heavy thud of footsteps entering the small room. "We got your email, Hayes," the gravelly voice stated, dripping with dark, violent amusement. "The boss accepts the new terms." Good Spencer stammered, his arrogant executive persona entirely evaporating into raw, pathetic cowardice. "You have the paperwork. Audrey is the guarantor. The debt is secured under her name." There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of paper ripping. "Yeah, about that," a second, equally menacing voice chimed in. The boss reviewed the guarantor's assets. "Turns out your little girlfriend here is completely broke. She does not own the Bellevue house. She has no corporate equity. She is a liability, not an asset." What Audrey screamed, her voice bordering on hysterical. "Spencer, what are they talking about? What debt?" "The boss does not want her signature," the first man growled, the sound of a heavy hand slamming against a table vibrating through the speakers. "The boss wants his money. Today. And since you cannot pay, we are going to start liquidating your physical assets. Hand over the keys to the Porsche, hand over the watches, and empty your pockets." "You cannot do this," Spencer pleaded, his voice breaking. "I just need more time. I can get the money from my ex-wife. I just need a week." "Your time is up, Hayes." I reached out and closed my laptop, cutting off the sounds of Spencer's panicked begging and Audrey's terrified sobbing. The room descended into a heavy, absolute silence. Jamal sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. My sister had betrayed me to steal a life of luxury. Instead, she had tethered herself to a sinking ship, signing her life away to a man who had effortlessly served her to a pack of wolves to save his own skin. The engagement was over. The illusion was dead. And the true nightmare for Spencer and Audrey had only just begun. The morning sun brought absolutely no relief to the miserable occupants of the roadside motel. I knew this because I was sitting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room at the downtown police precinct, a fresh cup of coffee warming my hands while Jamal monitored the live audio feed from Spencer's compromised phone. We had arrived at the precinct 2 hours before dawn. Jamal had utilized his professional credentials as a certified fraud examiner to secure a direct meeting with Special Agent Vance, a seasoned investigator with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We had just finished handing over the encrypted flash drives containing every wire transfer dummy corporation invoice and offshore routing number Spencer had generated over the past 14 months. The trap was set. The steel jaws were locked into place. Jamal tapped his keyboard, isolating a new incoming call on the audio feed. Spencer survived the night, Jamal noted, his voice maintaining a clinical professional detachment. The loan shark stripped him of his Rolex, took the keys to the Porsche, and confiscated Audrey's designer luggage as a down payment. They gave him exactly 48 hours to produce the remaining $500,000 in cash, or they promised to return for Audrey. Right on cue, the audio feed crackled to life. My father was calling Spencer. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany conference table. Special Agent Vance paused his review of the financial dossiers and looked up, his sharp gray eyes focusing on the audio speaker. "Spencer!" My father gasped, his voice entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. He sounded like a man drowning. He was hyperventilating, the sound of his panicked breaths echoing harshly through the digital feed. "Spencer, tell me there is a mistake. I just tried to pay for my morning coffee at the country club, and my platinum card was declined. The bank manager just called me directly." Spencer's voice was remarkably steady, considering he had just spent the night pleading for his life with violent criminals. "Richard, what are you talking about?" The money, my father practically screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "The private investment portfolio. The retirement fund. I logged into the portal and the balance is zero. $1.5 million is completely gone. Spencer, you promised me those funds were locked in a high-yield tech incubator. Where is my money?" I watched as Special Agent Vance raised an eyebrow, jotting down a quick note on his legal pad. He was listening to a man realizing his life savings had been vaporized by a corporate con artist. But Spencer was a predator, and predators do not surrender when cornered. They lash out. They find a weaker target. "Richard, listen to me very carefully," Spencer said, his voice dropping into a low, urgent register, perfectly mimicking a man attempting to manage a crisis. It was Natalie. In the precinct conference room, I let out a soft, humorless laugh. He was actually trying to pin his federal embezzlement and gambling debts on me. What my father stammered, "What do you mean it was Natalie? She has gone completely insane." Richard, Spencer lied, the words flowing from his mouth with practiced, terrifying ease. "She found out about the engagement party last night. She is insanely jealous of Audrey. Natalie works in corporate marketing, but she has access to high-level financial software. She hacked into the Nova Horizon corporate accounts. She bypassed the security protocols and drained your retirement funds out of pure spite." "That is impossible," my father argued, though his tone wavered desperately, wanting to believe the fiction. "She does not have the technical clearance to bypass a bank firewall." "Daddy, it is true!" Audrey's shrill, hysterical voice suddenly pierced the audio feed. She was clearly leaning over Spencer's shoulder, shouting directly into the phone. "She evicted us last night. She showed up with the sheriff and threw us out onto the street. We are sitting in a filthy motel room because Natalie stole our house, and now she has stolen your money. She is a criminal, Daddy. You have to stop her." The sheer delusion of my sister was staggering. She had just spent the night watching loan sharks strip her fiancé of his luxury items, yet she still blindly accepted his narrative. She was so desperate to be the victim that she eagerly swallowed the most illogical lie imaginable. My mother's voice joined the chaotic chorus on the other end of the line. "I told you!" Richard, Diane shrieked, her voice vibrating with toxic rage. "I told you that girl was a monster. She humiliated us at the restaurant, and now she is trying to bankrupt us. We are going to the police right now. I want her locked in a federal penitentiary. I want her in handcuffs." "Go to the downtown precinct," Spencer instructed, smoothly, expertly directing their misplaced fury. "Audrey and I will meet you there. We will file a joint statement. Tell the police everything, Richard. Tell them Natalie Adams is a grand larcenist." The call abruptly disconnected. Jamal hit a button on his keyboard, shutting down the audio feed. He looked over at me, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "He is not going to meet them here," Jamal stated, stating the obvious. "He is using your parents as a noisy distraction so he can make a run for the Canadian border." Special Agent Vance closed his legal pad and stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Spencer Hayes is not going anywhere near a border," Vance said, his voice flat and authoritative. "I dispatched a surveillance team to his motel 20 minutes ago. They have eyes on the perimeter, but it sounds like we are about to have some very loud visitors in the lobby." Right on cue, a massive commotion erupted beyond the frosted glass walls of our conference room. I stood up, smoothing down my tailored skirt, and walked toward the door, pulling the blinds aside, just enough to get a clear view of the precinct lobby. My parents had arrived. They stormed through the heavy double doors, moving with the frantic, aggressive energy of people who believed the world owed them an immediate apology. My father's face was flushed a violent shade of purple. My mother was waving her arms wildly, shouting at a thoroughly unimpressed desk sergeant. Right behind them, trailing like a miserable shadow, was Audrey. She looked absolutely ruined. She was still wearing the white silk maternity gown from the engagement party, but it was deeply wrinkled and stained. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were darting around the police station with a mixture of entitlement and raw terror. Spencer, of course, was nowhere to be seen. "I demand to speak to the captain immediately," my father roared, slamming his fist against the reinforced glass of the reception desk. "My daughter Natalie Adams is a cyber criminal. She has stolen $1.5 million from my private accounts. I want an arrest warrant issued right this second. She is a dangerous thief." My mother echoed, her voice echoing off the high cinder block walls of the precinct. "She stole my daughter's house. She is trying to ruin our family. Arrest her." I pushed the conference room door open and stepped out into the chaotic lobby. The sharp, confident click of my heels against the linoleum floor instantly drew their attention. "Hello, Mother?" "Hello, Father," I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You are looking incredibly desperate this morning." My parents froze. Audrey gasped, taking a step back as if I were holding a weapon. They clearly had not expected me to be standing in the middle of a police precinct looking perfectly composed and completely untouchable. "There she is!" my father bellowed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Arrest her, officer. She hacked my retirement portfolio. Spencer told us everything. You vindictive, bitter little girl. Hand over the money right now, or I swear I will see you rot in a cell." I did not flinch. I simply crossed my arms and looked at him with profound pity. "You gave your life savings to a con artist, Dad," I said, keeping my tone clinically detached. "You handed your money to a man who used it to pay off his sports bets and fund his mistress's designer wardrobe. I did not hack your accounts. Your golden boy bled you dry, and you were too arrogant to see it." "You are a liar!" Audrey screamed, stepping out from behind my mother. Her face was contorted with panic and unearned rage. "Spencer has proof. He is bringing the corporate documents right now. He is going to show the police exactly what you did. You are going to prison, Natalie." The door to the conference room opened wider. Jamal stepped out looking immaculate in a charcoal suit, holding a thick file folder. Right behind him, Special Agent Vance emerged, his gold FBI shield clipped prominently to his belt. The sight of the federal badge immediately silenced my parents. Their aggressive posturing melted into sudden, terrified confusion. "Actually, Audrey," Jamal said, his voice carrying a smooth, devastating authority as he stopped right beside me. "Spencer is not bringing any documents today. He is currently sitting in the back of an armored federal transport vehicle." Jamal offered my parents a brilliant, razor-sharp smile. "Perfect timing," Richard Jamal said, looking directly at my father. "You are exactly who we need. You arrived just in time. The FBI is currently looking for someone to bail Spencer out in a transnational financial fraud case." My father's face contorted from rage to utter bewilderment. He stared at Jamal, then shifted his gaze to Special Agent Vance. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The booming authority he had wielded just seconds ago evaporated into the sterile air of the police precinct. Audrey let out a high-pitched wail, clutching her stomach and leaning heavily against my mother. My mother simply stared at the gold FBI shield clipped to Vance's belt, her eyes wide with mounting horror. It took exactly 4 hours for my father to completely ruin whatever remained of his life. Despite Special Agent Vance explicitly outlining the severity of the federal embezzlement charges, my father refused to believe he had been conned. He was a man too deeply invested in his own ego to admit he had handed his life savings to a criminal. In his warped mind, the government was wrong. I was wrong. Spencer was simply a victim of corporate sabotage. Driven by this blinding delusion, my father called in every remaining favor he had in the financial district. He liquidated my mother's remaining jewelry collection. He took out a predatory high-interest loan against his future pension. He mortgaged his own soul just to post Spencer's astronomical federal bail. Spencer walked out of federal holding that evening, battered but incredibly dangerous. Like any cornered predator, he immediately went to work on Audrey and my parents, spinning a masterful web of deceit. He sat in my parents' modest temporary rental and cried. He claimed the FBI investigation was a clerical error, a witch hunt orchestrated by my corporate connections to ruin his reputation and steal Audrey's happiness. And amazingly, they swallowed every single word. They had to. Admitting Spencer was a fraud meant admitting their own financial destruction. But Spencer's situation was absolutely critical. The underground loan sharks were breathing down his neck demanding their $500,000. The FBI had frozen his remaining offshore accounts. He needed clean, untraceable cash, and he needed it immediately before his trial date. So he made the most reckless, arrogant move possible. He decided to host a massive high society engagement gala. 3 days later, I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room of my newly expanded marketing firm. Jamal sat across from me, finalizing the forensic accounting packets for the district attorney. We were compiling the final nails for Spencer's coffin. A courier knocked on the glass door, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. I signed for the delivery, broke the seal, and pulled out a heavy cardstock invitation. The elegant cursive font announced the grand engagement celebration of Spencer Hayes and Audrey Adams to be held at the Grand Ballroom of the city's most exclusive luxury hotel, the Grand Monarch. I shook my head in disbelief. Spencer had used the very last of his hidden embezzled cash reserves to rent the venue. He was banking on the tradition of wealthy society guests, bringing envelopes stuffed with thousands of dollars in cash gifts. It was a high society shakedown. He planned to take the cash from the gift table, pay off the loan sharks to get the bounty off his head, and flee the country before his federal indictment. But it was the small, handwritten note tucked inside the heavy envelope that caught my full attention. I pulled out the piece of matching luxury stationery. The handwriting was unmistakably Audrey's, looping and overly stylized. I read the words silently, feeling a cold, calculating energy settle deep into my bones. You have no house, no husband, and no money. You are nothing. Come watch your sister become a queen. I read it twice. There was no anger left in me. There was no hurt. There was only a profound clinical pity for a woman who was actively chaining herself to a sinking anchor. Audrey truly believed she had won. She believed she had successfully stolen my life and was ascending to the throne of high society. She had absolutely no idea she was simply bait in a desperate criminal's escape plan. I slid the note across the polished mahogany table to Jamal. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the cruel words. He let out a sharp, cynical laugh, tossing the paper back onto the table. She really has absolutely no idea what is about to hit her, Jamal asked, leaning back in his chair. Spencer is using her as a prop to solicit cash so he can run for the border, and she actually thinks she is being crowned royalty. The sheer level of delusion is almost impressive. She is a willing participant in her own destruction. I replied with my voice perfectly steady. My parents fueled her entitlement and Spencer weaponized it. Now they are all going to fall together. I picked up the handwritten note and the gold-embossed invitation. I walked over to the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the thick cardstock into the machine, listening to the satisfying mechanical grind as my sister's delusions were reduced to tiny strips of confetti. I turned back to Jamal and my expression completely resolved. Contact Special Agent Vance. I instructed, my voice clear and unwavering. Tell him Spencer is gathering all of his high society marks in one room tomorrow night. Tell the FBI he is expecting a massive influx of untraceable cash gifts to fund his flight risk. Jamal's fingers were already flying across his keyboard, initiating the secure communication protocols with the federal agents. Consider it done. Vance has been waiting for Spencer to make a move like this. What do you need from my end, Natalie? I walked back to the conference table and placed my hands flat against the cool wood. Print every bank statement, every loan shark guarantee with Audrey's signature, and every forged corporate deed Spencer ever drafted, I commanded. Make sure the financial dossiers are impeccably organized. Put them in premium leather binders. Jamal closed his laptop, a predatory smile matching my own lighting up his face. I will have the entire paper trail bound and ready by tomorrow morning. What is the play? I looked out the massive office windows at the sprawling city skyline below. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the financial district. Pack up all the evidence, Jamal, I said, turning back to face him. Tomorrow night's gala is going to be their final stage. They want an audience. They want a spectacle. We are going to give them exactly what they asked for. But I'm going to make sure the curtain falls permanently. Jamal nodded curtly, gathering the preliminary files to begin his all-night printing session. As he exited my glass-walled office, my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a text message arrived. I need to see you, just us. Sister to sister. Before the gala tomorrow. Meet me at the Onyx Cafe in 1 hour. If you ever cared about me, you will come. I stared at the glowing screen. Sister to sister. It was a laughable concept considering she had spent the last 2 years actively dismantling my marriage and stealing my life. But my strategic mind immediately recognized an opportunity. Audrey was acting independently of Spencer. He would never allow her to negotiate without his direct supervision. He was too busy dodging federal agents and underground enforcers to babysit her. She was panicking, and panic breeds catastrophic mistakes. I typed back a single word of confirmation. Then I opened my bottom desk drawer and retrieved a specific piece of equipment my private security firm had provided a week ago. It was a flawless, high-definition micro camera seamlessly integrated into the gold hardware of my black leather tote bag. I activated the recording sequence, synced the audio feed to my secure cloud server, and headed downstairs. The Onyx Cafe was a dimly lit, aggressively modern coffee shop tucked into a quiet alleyway a few blocks from my office. At this hour, it was practically deserted, save for a barista wiping down the espresso machine. I arrived first, selecting a corner booth that offered a clear vantage point of the entrance. I positioned my tote bag perfectly upright on the table facing the empty seat opposite me. The tiny lens captured the entire booth, illuminating the trap I had just set. 10 minutes later, Audrey pushed through the heavy glass doors. The contrast between her current reality and her desperate attempts to project wealth was staggering. She wore a tailored trench coat that was clearly expensive, but her posture was hunched. Her eyes darted around the cafe nervously, like a hunted animal scanning for predators. The intense stress of the loan sharks, the freezing motel room, and the impending federal investigation was visibly corroding her from the inside out. She spotted me and marched over, sliding into the booth. She did not bother to order a drink or remove her coat. She just stared at me, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were stark white. "Natalie, please," Audrey began, her voice trembling with an expertly manufactured fragility. "We need to stop this madness. You have made your point. You terrified Mom and Dad. You humiliated Spencer, and you ruined my engagement announcement. But this has gone too far." I leaned back against the leather booth, crossing my arms. I simply raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to hang herself. "We are blood." Natalie, Audrey continued, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I pulled my hand away, letting it rest in my lap. Audrey swallowed hard, her fake empathy faltering slightly before she forced it back into place. "You cannot leave me homeless. I am carrying your niece or nephew. We used to be so close. Remember when we were little? You always protected me. You are my big sister. You cannot just throw me to the wolves. Withdraw the eviction notice. Call your lawyers and unfreeze the corporate trust. Let Spencer handle the finances so we can just move on and be a family again." I looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You slept in my bed, Audrey. You wore my clothes. You helped a criminal drain my savings to fund your delusions of grandeur. Do not sit here and weaponize our childhood to save yourself from the consequences of your own betrayal. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. I am not lifting a single finger to save you." The fragile, sisterly facade vanished in an absolute instant. The manufactured tears evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, vicious sneer. Audrey leaned forward, her true malicious nature finally bleeding through the cracks of her pampered executive wife persona. "I told Spencer you would be a stubborn bitch about this," Audrey hissed, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. "But he is too soft on you." "I am not. If you do not sign the Bellevue house over to me and release those funds by noon tomorrow, I am going to the press." I tilted my head, feigning mild curiosity. "What press exactly?" "I have a journalist from the City Chronicle on standby." Audrey said, a triumphant, arrogant smirk twisting her features. He has a drafted exclusive ready to publish. The headline is going to ruin you, Natalie. I am going on record stating that you are mentally unstable. I am going to tell the world that Spencer had to leave you because you were violently jealous and physically abusive. I maintained my steady gaze, refusing to give her the reaction she desperately craved. I have photos of bruises. Audrey continued, her tone dripping with malice. I will swear under oath that you threw glass bottles at him, that you locked him out in the freezing cold, that you threatened my life when you found out he finally found true love. I will tell them you are a psychotic, bitter ex-wife who is using her wealth to terrorize an innocent pregnant woman. She crossed her arms, leaning back into the leather booth with an air of absolute victory. Your fancy corporate clients are going to drop you the second they read that their marketing director is a violent domestic abuser. You will lose your firm. You will lose your pristine reputation. You will be a social pariah. You will have absolutely nothing. So sign the property transfer papers or I hit publish and destroy your life. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I did not try to argue with her insane, fabricated narrative. I simply picked up my chamomile tea and took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, as Audrey waited for me to crumble and beg for mercy. Instead, I set my cup down gently on the saucer. I reached across the table and tapped my manicured fingernail against the gold hardware of my black leather tote bag, right next to the tiny hidden lens. Are you familiar with the criminal statutes in Washington state? Audrey? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and conversational. Her smug smile faltered. Her eyes darted from my face to the handbag. What are you talking about? Extortion is a Class B felony, I explained, watching the blood rapidly drain from her face as realization began to dawn. Blackmailing someone for property or financial assets under the explicit threat of false public defamation carries a very severe penalty. I am talking 5 to 10 years in a state penitentiary. And you just explicitly detailed your entire blackmail scheme, your intent to commit perjury, and your plan to falsify evidence while looking directly into a high-definition hidden camera. Audrey gasped, a sharp intake of breath echoing in the quiet cafe. Her eyes locked onto the gold hardware of my bag, widening in absolute horror. Her entire body began to tremble, the arrogant confidence completely evaporating into raw, pathetic terror. I slid out of the booth, straightening my tailored jacket. Good job, Audrey, I said, looking down at her terrified, pale face. Extortion carries a pretty long sentence in Washington state. You just gave me the exact leverage I needed. Enjoy your engagement gala tomorrow night. It is going to be the absolute performance of a lifetime. And you are going to spend every single second of it knowing I hold the keys to your prison cell. I left Audrey frozen in the cafe booth, her face drained of all color, staring at my handbag as if it were a loaded gun. I did not wait for her to formulate a pathetic excuse. I turned and walked out into the crisp evening air, feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity. The extortion recording was immediately uploaded to Jamal's secure server. Audrey was effectively neutralized, a terrified pawn trapped in a game she could no longer comprehend. The heavy oak doors of the King County Courthouse swung open the following morning, revealing a theater of an entirely different kind. Today was our emergency divorce and asset division hearing. Spencer had somehow managed to leverage the absolute last of his parents' drained retirement funds to secure his federal bail, but he looked like a walking corpse. He sat at the petitioner's table, his designer suit hanging loosely on his diminishing frame, deep, dark circles carving hollows under his eyes. The physical toll of dodging violent loan sharks and federal investigators was obvious. Yet despite facing a massive federal indictment and imminent financial ruin, his trademark arrogance remained stubbornly intact. He adjusted his silk tie and shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Beside him sat his attorney, a notoriously aggressive litigator, known for employing sleazy, underhanded courtroom tactics. My attorney, an impeccably sharp woman named Diane, sat calmly beside me. She arranged her files with surgical precision, her demeanor projecting quiet, absolute confidence. The judge, an older, stern-faced man with zero tolerance for legal theatrics, called the room to order. The moment he did, Spencer's lawyer went straight on the offensive. He launched into a loud, theatrical monologue designed to paint me as a vindictive, calculating spouse, hoarding marital wealth. Your Honor, my client is simply asking for his legal entitlement, the lawyer boomed, pacing in front of our table. During the course of this marriage, Natalie Adams established Nova Horizon LLC. Under the community property laws of this state, any wealth generated during the marriage belongs equally to both parties. My client is facing severe financial distress, largely orchestrated by his wife's malicious corporate maneuvers. We demand an immediate injunction to liquidate 50% of the LLC's assets, freeze her personal accounts, and force the sale of the Bellevue estate to cover his mounting liabilities. Spencer leaned back in his chair, offering me a tight, vicious smile. He truly believed he had found the ultimate loophole. He thought that by weaponizing the family court system, he could force a massive settlement, drain my accounts, and pay off the underground syndicate before they made good on their violent threats. He thought he could use the law to rob me blind one last time. The judge turned his piercing gaze toward our table. Does the respondent have a rebuttal to this community property claim? Diane stood up, smoothing her tailored jacket. She did not raise her voice. She did not waste time arguing about the bulletproof nature of the Nova Horizon Asset Protection Trust. Instead, she opened a slim leather folder and extracted a single slightly yellowed document. We do not dispute that Nova Horizon LLC was formed during the marriage, Your Honor, Diane stated, her voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. However, community property laws do not apply in this specific case due to a legally binding contract executed by both parties a decade ago. She presented the document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. I watched Spencer's brow furrow in confusion. 10 years ago, Spencer was an arrogant, fast-rising junior executive, and I was just a young woman starting to build my career. Spencer had been so terrified that I might one day claim a fraction of his precious future wealth that he forced me to sign a prenuptial agreement the night before our wedding. He had been drunk on expensive champagne, and his own inflated ego bragging to his groomsmen that he was bulletproofing his assets against a gold digger. He had his cheap lawyers draft it rapidly, shoving it across a hotel table and aggressively demanding my signature. But Spencer, in his drunken, arrogant haste, had failed to read the revised fine print my own lawyer had slipped into the final draft before execution. It contained a very specific, unbreakable morality clause. Your Honor. Diane continued, her eyes fixed coldly on Spencer. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of this prenuptial agreement contains a strict infidelity clause. It explicitly states that in the event of documented marital infidelity, the offending party immediately forfeits any and all rights to marital assets, community property, and spousal support. Furthermore, the contract dictates that the cheating spouse must assume absolute and sole responsibility for any debts accrued under their name, regardless of when they were incurred during the marriage. Spencer's lawyer jumped up, his face red with sudden panic. Objection, Your Honor! This is a desperate attempt to rely on a decade-old document. Furthermore, there is no legal proof of infidelity presented before this court. My client vehemently denies these baseless allegations. Diane simply smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. She reached into her briefcase and slid a sealed medical file onto the judge's bench. The petitioner's denial is irrelevant, Your Honor. I have just submitted a DNA registry and official medical admission forms from the Seattle Maternity Clinic. The records prove unequivocally that Audrey Adams, the respondent's biological sister, is currently 20 weeks pregnant with the petitioner's child. It is indisputable biological proof of absolute betrayal. The courtroom descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. Spencer's face drained of all blood, turning a sickly ashen gray. He lunged forward, grabbing his lawyer's sleeve, hissing frantically. He had completely forgotten about the prenuptial agreement. He had spent the last decade assuming he was the untouchable mastermind, never realizing he had signed his own financial death warrant the night before our wedding. Diane was not finished. She had one final devastating blow to deliver. Regarding the petitioner's debts, Your Honor, Diane said, projecting her voice so every word landed like a physical strike. We have subpoenaed the audited financial statements recovered by federal investigators. The petitioner does not just owe $500,000 to underground syndicates. With the illegal gambling debts, the compounding mob interest rates, the violent penalty fees, and the impending federal restitution demands from his corporate embezzlement, his total liability has drastically escalated. The petitioner is currently harboring a verified debt of $3 million. Spencer stopped breathing. His lawyer dropped his pen, staring at his client with undisguised horror. $3 million. The federal audit had uncovered the true extent of his depravity, and the loan sharks had capitalized on his desperation, multiplying his debt beyond any hope of recovery. He had leveraged phantom assets to borrow more money to cover his failing bets, digging a grave so deep he could never climb out. The judge reviewed the documents in absolute silence. His eyes moved from the prenuptial agreement to the medical records and finally to the staggering financial audit. When he looked up at Spencer, his expression was one of profound disgust. "The evidence presented is indisputable," the judge stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "The prenuptial agreement is valid and fully enforceable. The petition for asset division is completely struck down. The respondent, Natalie Adams, owes the petitioner absolutely nothing. Furthermore, pursuant to the contractual terms, all financial liabilities totaling $3 million are hereby declared the sole and exclusive responsibility of Spencer Hayes. The respondent is legally severed from all debts. This divorce is finalized." The judge brought his heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. The sound seemed to physically break Spencer. He collapsed back into his leather chair, his eyes wide and vacant, his breathing shallow and erratic. He was completely stripped of his assets, legally severed from my wealth, and officially on the hook for $3 million to a criminal syndicate that was already liquidating his physical life. He was a dead man walking. I stood up, buttoned my tailored jacket, and looked down at the pathetic, trembling shell of my ex-husband. I nodded silently to Diane. We had utterly destroyed him in the eyes of the law. Now all that remained was the final social execution. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, my mind already focused on tomorrow night. Pack up all the evidence, I thought to myself, the anticipation buzzing in my veins. Tonight's gala would be their final stage. The anticipation for the gala was a physical hum beneath my skin, but the morning required my absolute focus at the Nova Horizon LLC corporate headquarters. I knew the devastating court ruling would not be the end of my family's desperate flailing. Spencer was backed into a corner with a $3 million mob debt securely chained to his neck, and my parents were pathologically incapable of letting their golden child Audrey face the terrifying consequences of her own horrific choices. They were going to make a final desperate play for survival. I arrived at my office tower early the morning after the divorce hearing. I owned the entire top 3 floors of a premier glass skyscraper located in the most expensive commercial district of downtown Bellevue. Spencer and my parents had always operated under the arrogant assumption that Nova Horizon was merely a tiny corporate shell, a superficial tax haven I used to stash my marketing salary. They had absolutely no concept of the reality I had constructed behind their backs. Over the past 7 years, I had aggressively leveraged my early tech investments and ruthlessly acquired undervalued commercial properties. I did not just work for Nova Horizon. I was the founder, the sole proprietor, and the undisputed chairman of a real estate empire worth tens of millions. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the forensic financial packets Jamal had prepared for the FBI when my private intercom buzzed. Sarah, my lead executive receptionist, spoke with practiced professional calm. "Ms. Adams, there is a severe disturbance in the main lobby." Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the chaotic shouting filtering through the receiver. "An older couple claiming to be your parents are demanding to speak directly with the chief executive officer. They are becoming incredibly hostile to the security staff and are actively threatening to contact the local press if they are not compensated immediately." I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I instructed Sarah to patch the lobby security audio directly into my office speakers. The shrill, hysterical voice of my mother instantly filled my serene workspace, bouncing off the soundproof glass walls. We are not leaving this building until we see the man in charge of this fraudulent operation. My father bellowed, his voice vibrating with absolute entitled rage. Your marketing director, Natalie Adams, is a corporate thief and a certified psychopath. She stole my daughter's house through illegal legal loopholes. We have absolute proof of her mental instability, and we are going to ruin this company's reputation unless the CEO comes down here and writes us a check for $3 million right now to cover the damages she caused our family. It was a spectacularly brilliant display of reckless, arrogant stupidity. They were actually attempting a corporate shakedown. They were trying to extort my non-existent boss, hoping to terrify the company into paying a massive settlement just to keep their brand reputation intact. They wanted to use the extorted corporate funds to bail Spencer out of his mob debt and save Audrey from financial ruin. I pressed the silver intercom button on my desk. Sarah, please offer our loud guests some sparkling water and escort them to the VIP executive boardroom on the penthouse floor. Tell them the chairman will see them immediately to discuss their financial demands in private. I left my office and walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward the VIP boardroom. It was an intimidating, opulent space designed specifically for high-stakes corporate acquisitions. The walls were paneled in rich, dark mahogany, and the center of the room was dominated by a massive, polished obsidian table. I took my seat in the high-backed, leather chairman's chair at the far end of the room. I slowly turned the chair so its high back faced the door, and I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows at the sprawling Bellevue skyline. I sat in perfect silence and waited for the trap to spring. 3 minutes later, the heavy double doors clicked open. I heard the aggressive, heavy footsteps of my father and the sharp, rapid click of my mother's heels against the hardwood floor. Sarah ushered them inside and quietly pulled the heavy doors shut, sealing them in the room with me. "We do not have time for corporate pleasantries," my father announced, immediately speaking to the back of my leather chair. His voice dripped with an arrogant assumption of power. "We are here to negotiate a highly sensitive settlement. You employ a woman named Natalie Adams. She is a vindictive, mentally unstable liability who has actively destroyed our family through malicious financial manipulation. We want $3 million wired into our private account by noon today. If the funds are not cleared, we are going straight to the Seattle Times with a story that will permanently destroy your corporate image. We know she hides money in this firm. Pay us the settlement, or we burn this company to the ground." I let his pathetic extortion attempt hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the room became absolute, suffocating and dense. Then I placed my hands on the armrests and slowly swiveled the leather chair around to face them. 2 pairs of eyes locked onto mine. The physical reaction was instantaneous and magnificent. The blood vanished from my father's face as if it had been siphoned out of his veins. My mother physically stumbled backward, her expensive designer handbag slipping from her frozen grasp and hitting the floor with a dull, pathetic thud. Their eyes darted wildly around the opulent boardroom, taking in the custom furnishings, the priceless artwork, and the undeniable, terrifying reality that I was not a mid-level employee hiding behind a corporate shell. I was the apex predator sitting at the top of the food chain. "You!" my mother gasped, her voice barely a broken whisper, her throat working frantically as she struggled to comprehend the sheer magnitude of her colossal error. "This is your company. You are the CEO." I leaned forward, resting my elbows gracefully on the obsidian table. "I own this entire building." "Mother," I stated, my voice radiating a chilling, absolute authority. "I own the commercial plaza across the street. I own the luxury residential complex where Spencer desperately tried to lease an apartment last month. You marched into my fortress, bypassed my security, and explicitly threatened to destroy my corporate reputation unless I paid you $3 million. I paused, letting the weight of my words crush the last remaining fragments of their arrogance. "Do you two want to extort the chairman of the real estate investment group that owns half of this Bellevue district? Too bad the security cameras are live streaming this to the police station." I gestured casually toward the sleek black dome mounted discreetly in the corner of the ceiling. Our corporate security protocols dictate that any financial threats made against the company are immediately recorded and transmitted to an off-site secure server monitored directly by the Bellevue Police Department Fraud Division. You literally just walked in here and handed the authorities a perfect, crystal-clear recorded confession of felony blackmail. My father's arrogant posture entirely collapsed inward. He looked like a deflated balloon, a pathetic, desperate old man realizing he had just driven the final nail into his own coffin. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of the obsidian table just to remain standing. Natalie pleaded, he stammered, his voice vibrating with sudden raw terror. The blustering patriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a begging coward. We were just upset. Spencer told us the loan sharks are going to kill him and go after Audrey. They took his car. They took her jewelry. We need cash. You have all this wealth. You have millions. You can save your sister. Please, Natalie, you have to help us survive this. I stood up slowly, towering over them in my own boardroom. You traded your morality for Spencer's pathetic illusions of grandeur. I said, my voice was ice cold and utterly unforgiving. You actively enabled a criminal. You stood by and watched him try to steal my life, and you cheered him on because you thought his fake wealth would elevate your pathetic social status. You made your bed with a con artist and a thief. Now you get to lie in it while it burns. I pressed a discreet button on my smartwatch. The heavy boardroom doors opened instantly, revealing two massive, imposing corporate security guards dressed in immaculate black suits. Escort these individuals off the premises, I instructed the guards without breaking eye contact with my trembling parents. If they ever step foot within a 50-yard radius of this building again, you are to have them arrested immediately for criminal trespassing and felony extortion. As the security guards firmly grasped their arms and began physically dragging them toward the exit, my mother let out a pathetic, broken sob, reaching a shaking hand back toward me. I simply smoothed down my tailored skirt and offered them a final, razor-sharp smile. Go home and get dressed, I told them as they were pulled into the hallway. I hear Spencer is hosting a spectacularly expensive engagement gala tonight to celebrate his new life with Audrey. It would be a tragic shame if you missed the grand finale. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut, severing my parents' desperate protests from my quiet sanctuary. I stood alone in the center of the room, letting the profound silence wash over me. For 30 years, I had allowed those people to dictate my worth. They had treated me as a stepping stone, a convenient background character in the grand theatrical production of their golden child's life. Now they were entirely broken, stripped of their unearned arrogance, and cast out onto the cold street by the very daughter they had relentlessly diminished. I walked back to the panoramic windows, watching the tiny figures of my parents emerge onto the sidewalk far below. My mother was clutching her designer bag, her shoulders shaking visibly, while my father stared blankly at the rushing traffic. They had marched into my fortress to extort me for $3 million and left with the terrifying realization that their entire world was about to violently collapse. I checked my watch. It was exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Only 3 hours remained until the lavish doors of the Grand Monarch Ballroom would swing open for Spencer and Audrey's grand engagement gala. 3 hours until Spencer's meticulously crafted house of cards went up in federal flames. I left the office and took my private secure elevator up to my residential penthouse. The sprawling, minimalist apartment was a testament to my true independence, a sanctuary Spencer had never touched, and my parents had never seen. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and walked into my expansive dressing room. My phone buzzed sharply against the cool marble vanity. The caller ID showed a secure, encrypted line. I answered immediately. Jamal's voice came through crisp and vibrating with raw electric adrenaline. Natalie, we have absolute confirmation. I am standing outside the federal courthouse right now with Nicole. Nicole was my lead legal liaison, a razor-sharp strategist who had spent the last 2 weeks directly coordinating with the federal prosecutors. She took over the line, her tone strictly professional, but underscored with undeniable triumph. The federal judge just signed the warrants, Natalie. Special Agent Vance presented the final forensic packets you and Jamal compiled. The judge did not even hesitate to review the supplementary evidence. We have fully executed federal arrest warrants for Spencer Hayes. The charges are massive and inescapable. 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of corporate embezzlement, and 1 highly severe count of international money laundering. I leaned against the marble vanity, feeling a deep, satisfying calm settle into my bones. "So Vance is moving in tonight?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. Jamal hopped back on the line. "Tonight at the gala. Vance wants to make a clean sweep while Spencer is distracted and surrounded by his high society marks. He wants to cut off all exits before Spencer can try to flee the country with the cash gifts. But that is not even the best part, Natalie. Nicole just got the secondary warrants approved." I narrowed my eyes, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Secondary warrants. Nicole's voice crackled through the speaker, her excitement bleeding through her professional facade. "We followed the secondary money trail you flagged last week. The hidden offshore accounts Spencer used to funnel the embezzled corporate funds before transferring them to the underground syndicates. He did not just keep those accounts in his own name. He was actively trying to shield the money from the upcoming civil suits and the loan sharks. To do that, he needed a proxy. He needed someone with a clean financial record, a pristine background, and absolutely zero common sense regarding federal banking regulations. Audrey. I breathed, the realization hitting me with the force of a freight train. He put the stolen money in Audrey's name. Exactly. Jamal confirmed, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. "We found authorized wire transfers totaling over $800,000 directly deposited into 3 separate shell accounts. All of them are legally registered under Audrey Adams. She signed the incorporation documents in ink. She signed the bank authorizations. She provided her government identification to secure the transfers. Spencer convinced her she was becoming a wealthy corporate partner, but legally she just signed her own death warrant. The federal prosecutor just approved her status as a willing co-conspirator. Audrey is no longer just collateral damage, Natalie. She is an official accomplice to federal money laundering. Vance has an arrest warrant with her name on it, too." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer magnitude of my sister's spectacular stupidity. Audrey had been so blindingly eager to ascend to the throne of high society, so desperate to prove she was better and more successful than me, that she had blindly signed federal bank fraud documents without a second thought. She truly believed Spencer was gifting her a massive financial empire. Instead, he was using her as a human shield, a convenient scapegoat to absorb his massive federal crimes. My parents had spent my entire life shielding Audrey from the mildest of consequences. They had excused her cruelty, funded her entitlement, and enabled her delusions. Tonight, they were going to stand in a ballroom surrounded by the wealthy elite they so desperately wanted to impress, and watch their precious golden child get handcuffed by armed federal agents. I ended the call and turned to my wardrobe. This was not just a society party. This was a public execution, and I was the architect. I bypassed the understated, elegant business attire I usually favored. Tonight required absolute armor. Tonight required a statement of undeniable power. I reached into the back of the cedar closet and pulled out a custom-designed floor-length evening gown. It was crafted from heavy midnight blue silk that shifted like liquid shadow when I moved. The cut was sharp, elegant, and unapologetically predatory. I slipped into the dress, feeling the cool, heavy fabric settle flawlessly against my skin. I secured a simple, brilliant diamond choker around my neck, the only piece of jewelry I needed to command the room. I sat down at the vanity and began to meticulously apply my makeup. I kept the foundation flawless and the eye makeup sharp and calculating. Then I reached for a specific tube of lipstick. It was a shade of crimson so deep and vibrant it looked like fresh blood. I applied it carefully, tracing the exact uncompromising lines of my mouth. I stood up and looked in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was completely unrecognizable from the exhausted, terrified wife who had sat in a sterile police precinct just months ago. That weak, accommodating woman was dead and buried. I was the sole proprietor of my own empire, and tonight I was the harbinger of their absolute ruin. I grabbed my clutch, ensuring the secure backup drive containing all the financial evidence was safely tucked inside. I took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage, where a sleek black town car was already idling with its engine purring softly in the cool, damp air. Jamal and Nicole stood by the open rear doors. Jamal was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, looking every bit the ruthless corporate operative he was. Nicole stood beside him, clutching a thick premium leather binder embossed with the gold seal of the federal court. They both turned as I approached, their eyes widening slightly at the undeniable power radiating from my every step. I stopped in front of the open car door, my crimson lips curving into a cold, calculating smile. "Get in the car, Jamal, Nicole," I commanded, my voice clear and unwavering, echoing sharply through the concrete garage. "It is time to bring our engagement gift to our parents' precious little princess." The heavy doors of our armored town car slammed shut, sealing us inside the quiet luxury of the leather interior. Jamal tapped his earpiece, confirming the secure communication channel with Special Agent Vance was active. The FBI tactical teams were already quietly maneuvering into position around the perimeter of the Grand Monarch Hotel, establishing a watertight blockade at every exit. Nicole sat across from me, running her manicured fingers over the thick stacks of freshly printed federal evidence. The drive across the city felt absolutely electric. I watched the blurred city lights reflect against the tinted windows, feeling a profound, dangerous calm settle deep into my bones. The Grand Monarch Hotel was a towering beacon of excessive, blinding wealth. Valets in crisp uniforms were frantically rushing to park a continuous stream of imported sports cars and luxury sedans. Spencer had truly burned through the absolute last of his hidden stolen reserves to construct this illusion of success. Stepping out of the town car, the cool night air hit my face. My midnight blue silk gown caught the harsh flashes of a few local high society photographers lingering near the velvet ropes. Jamal and Nicole fell into step half a pace behind me, carrying the premium leather binders like executioners carrying their axes. The grand ballroom was a spectacular masterclass in financial delusion. Towering floral arrangements of imported white roses dominated every table. A live jazz band played softly from a gilded balcony, and an army of waitstaff circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. Hundreds of Seattle elite, the clueless wealthy Mark Spencer intended to fleece for untraceable cash gifts, were chatting and laughing, entirely oblivious to the criminal enterprise they were funding. I scanned the room, immediately locating my targets. On an elevated stage at the far end of the ballroom stood the architects of my former misery. Spencer wore a bespoke white tuxedo, looking incredibly tense, his forced smile straining against the visible terror in his eyes. Audrey stood right beside him, draped in a heavily sequined maternity gown, desperately clutching a flute of sparkling cider. My parents flanked them. They had clearly rushed back from their humiliating, devastating defeat at my corporate headquarters, slapped on their formal evening wear, and attempted to bury their raw panic beneath layers of forced aristocratic smugness. I stepped onto the plush crimson carpet, and the atmosphere in the cavernous ballroom shifted instantly. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The sheer, unadulterated authority radiating from my posture demanded absolute attention. The crowd of wealthy socialites naturally parted, forming a clear, unobstructed path directly from the entrance to the main stage. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes bulged in their sockets and the color rapidly drained from her face before being replaced by a mottled, flushed rage. She abandoned her post on the stage and marched down the carpeted steps, aggressively intercepting me halfway across the ballroom floor. "Security!" she hissed loudly, waving her arms frantically toward a pair of heavily built ushers stationed near the ice sculptures. "Get this woman out of here right now. She is not on the guest list. She is trespassing and she is actively harassing my family." I did not even break my stride. I simply stopped and looked at the approaching security guards, with a gaze so chillingly authoritative they froze entirely in their tracks. "I am a majority stakeholder in the commercial real estate group that currently owns this hotel property," I stated, my voice carrying effortlessly over the quiet murmurs of the stunned crowd. "If either of you touches me, you will be looking for new employment before midnight." The guards backed away, immediately recognizing the distinct difference between a hysterical party guest and actual undeniable corporate power. I brushed past my mother, leaving her trembling in her expensive heels, her mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. Spencer watched me approach the stage. I could see the frantic, desperate calculations racing behind his bloodshot eyes. He was cornered, drowning in a $3 million mob debt, and absolutely desperate to maintain the illusion of control in front of his wealthy marks. He needed their cash gifts tonight to survive. He grabbed the microphone from the heavy chrome stand, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the cold metal. "Well, well, well!" Spencer's voice boomed through the massive overhead speakers, dripping with a sickening manufactured pity. "Look who decided to crash the celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the interruption. It seems my poor, bitter ex-wife could not handle being legally removed from my life." He offered the crowd an arrogant, dismissive chuckle, hoping to rally the room against me. "Tell me, Natalie, did you come all this way just to beg for some leftover catered food?" Spencer mocked, leaning over the edge of the stage. "Oh, the poor ex-wife kicked out of her house came to beg for food. Have you finally realized you have absolutely nothing left?" A few highly uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience, but most guests remained dead silent, sensing the highly dangerous electricity crackling in the air. I reached the carpeted steps of the stage and ascended them with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator cornering its prey. Spencer's forced, arrogant smile faltered and began to collapse as I closed the final distance between us. He tried to stand his ground, puffing out his chest, but my presence was physically suffocating. I did not yell. I did not show a single fraction of anger or distress. I just stepped directly into his personal space and locked my eyes onto his terrified, sweating face. With one swift, fluid motion, I reached out and violently ripped the microphone straight out of his hand. Spencer gasped, stumbling backward and knocking into Audrey, who let out a sharp, high-pitched squeak of alarm. I turned my back on them, facing the sea of shocked, wealthy faces staring up at the stage. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice smooth, dark, and resonating powerfully through the grand ballroom. "I sincerely apologize for the unannounced arrival, but as the former wife of your supposedly gracious host, I felt a profound, undeniable moral obligation to attend tonight. You see, a high society engagement gala of this magnitude requires a very specific kind of celebration." I turned my head slightly, looking back over my shoulder at Spencer and Audrey. Audrey was shaking violently, holding her hands protectively over her stomach, her eyes wide with mounting horrific realization. My parents had frozen at the edge of the stage, utterly paralyzed by the impending disaster. They knew they lacked the power to stop. "I brought the most meaningful wedding gift for you two," I announced, holding Spencer's gaze as the last remaining light of hope completely drained from his eyes. I signaled Jamal with a slight, sharp nod of my head. Jamal stepped up to the edge of the stage, unclasped the heavy premium leather binder, and handed me a massive, incredibly thick stack of printed documents. I looked back out at the hundreds of wealthy investors, socialites, and corporate executives who had brought envelopes of cash to fund a criminal. "Enjoy the truth," I said, dropping the microphone onto the stage, where it landed with a loud, piercing feedback squeal. Then I took the thick stack of damning evidence and threw the papers violently into the air. The documents exploded upward, raining down like a devastating blizzard of corporate ruin over the front rows of the elite audience. Hundreds of pages fluttered to the polished floor, landing directly on the expensive shoes of Seattle's wealthiest citizens. Guests immediately dropped their champagne glasses, shattering crystal across the floor as they eagerly snatched the papers up. Eyes widened in absolute collective shock as the city's elite suddenly realized exactly what they were reading. They were holding the forensic bank statements proving Spencer's massive federal corporate embezzlement. They were reading the highly illegal wire transfer logs showing the stolen money flowing directly into offshore shell accounts legally registered in Audrey's name. And most devastatingly, they were staring at the explicit aggressive debt collection contracts from the underground gambling syndicate, verifying Spencer's staggering $3 million liability. The glamorous ballroom erupted into absolute chaotic pandemonium. Voices escalated into shouts of outrage and sheer panic as the wealthy guests suddenly realized they were not attending a prestigious engagement party. They were being actively used as unwitting pawns in a desperate criminal's attempt to flee a violently enforced mob bounty. The sudden realization that they were financing a fugitive transformed the room into a chaotic frenzy. Guests wearing $1,000 tuxedos and custom silk gowns began shoving past one another, desperate to distance themselves from the stage. Envelopes stuffed with cash were dropped onto the floor, abandoned by socialites who suddenly understood that associating with Spencer Hayes was a one-way ticket to a federal subpoena. Spencer panicked. The polished, charismatic executive mask he had worn for a decade melted off his face, revealing the feral, terrified animal underneath. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his face contorted in absolute rage, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "She is lying!" Spencer screamed, his voice cracking over the chaotic din of the ballroom. "She is a psychotic, jealous ex-wife. These documents are forged. She is trying to ruin me because I left her. Security, get this crazy bitch out of here right now." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground at the base of the stage, radiating an icy, impenetrable calm that silenced the guests nearest to me. I looked up at the frantic, sweating man who had once promised to share my life. "You do not own anything, Spencer." I projected my voice, cutting through the panic with surgical precision. "The luxury Bellevue estate you have been parading around in for the last month is legally registered to Nova Horizon LLC. It is my property. You are a squatter living in a house my money bought." I turned my gaze to Audrey, who was clutching her heavily sequenced maternity gown, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "And that massive diamond ring on your finger, Audrey?" I continued, my tone devoid of any sibling affection. "That was not purchased with love. It was purchased with stolen corporate funds. The venue we are standing in, the vintage champagne you are drinking, the very dress on your back, it was all paid for by defrauding innocent investors. You are celebrating a life built entirely on criminal theft." My mother could no longer contain herself. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy son-in-law was crumbling before her eyes, and her fragile ego simply refused to process reality. She threw herself between Spencer and me, shielding the criminal with her own body. Her face was flushed dark red with furious denial. "Shut your mouth, Natalie!" my mother shrieked, her voice echoing sharply across the room. "You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always wanted to destroy her happiness. Spencer is a brilliant, successful businessman. He is everything you could never secure for yourself. You are a bitter, lonely woman making up malicious lies to hide your own failures. Get out of here before I call the police myself." My father stepped up beside her, puffing out his chest, trying to project a threatening authority he no longer possessed. "We are not listening to another word of your jealous delusions," he demanded, gripping the edge of the stage. "You are a disgrace to this family. Spencer is taking care of us. Spencer is taking care of Audrey. He is twice the person you will ever be." I let out a slow, soft sigh. The sheer depth of their delusion was almost clinically fascinating. They were standing on the deck of the Titanic, actively defending the iceberg. I stepped aside slightly, clearing the path for the man who was holding the final devastating nail for their coffin. Jamal stepped forward. He did not look like an employee. He looked like an executioner. He adjusted his tailored jacket and opened the heavy premium leather binder he carried. The silver clasps snapped loudly in the tense atmosphere. "Mr. and Mrs. Adams." Jamal began, his deep, authoritative voice commanding immediate silence from the surrounding crowd. "My name is Jamal. I am the lead forensic financial auditor for Nova Horizon LLC. I have spent the last 72 hours tracing every single transaction your beloved son-in-law has made. You believe he is taking care of you. I highly suggest you listen to exactly how he has been managing your future." Jamal pulled a specific, highly sensitive bank statement from the binder and held it up so my parents could see the official bank logo printed at the top. "2 weeks ago, you granted Spencer Hayes full power of attorney over your joint retirement accounts." Jamal stated, his words falling like heavy stones. You authorized him to reinvest your life savings into a supposedly high-yield offshore corporate bond. My father swallowed hard, his aggressive posture faltering slightly. Yes, he said, his voice wavering. It was a strategic family investment. Spencer guaranteed us a 20% return. There was no corporate bond, Jamal countered brutally. Spencer immediately liquidated your entire portfolio, $1.5 million. Every single cent of your pensions, your savings, and the equity from the house you mortgaged. The color began to drain rapidly from my mother's face. She looked back at Spencer, her eyes pleading for him to interrupt, to tell them this was a massive misunderstanding. Spencer refused to meet her gaze, staring fixedly at the floor. He did not invest your money, Jamal continued, mercilessly reading directly from the audited federal report. He wired it directly to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, controlled by a violent underground gambling syndicate. He used your entire life savings to pay off a fraction of his own illegal sports betting debts. Your $1.5 million was gone less than 48 hours after you signed the authorization forms. You are entirely bankrupt. The silence that hit the stage was absolute. It was the terrifying vacuum of sound that occurs right before a massive implosion. My mother staggered backward as if she had been physically shot in the chest. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a horrific, guttural gasp. My father's face contorted from defensive anger into pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted from Jamal to the official documents and finally to Spencer. The denial keeping them afloat shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Spencer. My father choked out, his hands trembling violently. Spencer, tell me he is lying. Tell me our money is safe. You promised us. You swore on your child's life it was a secure transfer. My father lunged forward, grabbing the lapels of Spencer's bespoke white tuxedo. Give it back, he screamed, his voice cracking with the raw terror of a man realizing his life was over. Give me my money back right now. You stole my retirement. You stole everything. The sophisticated, charismatic facade finally broke completely. Spencer's survival instincts kicked in, erasing any lingering pretense of familial loyalty. He forcefully, violently shoved my father backward. My father tripped over the microphone cord and collapsed hard onto the stage floor, his expensive suit tearing against a metal speaker stand. Get your pathetic hands off me, you stupid old man! Spencer snarled, his face twisted into an ugly, feral sneer. You handed me that money. You signed the papers because you are greedy and desperate to look rich. You are a naive idiot, and your money is gone. Do you hear me? It is gone. My mother dropped to her knees beside my father, letting out a piercing, hysterical wail. The realization of their absolute financial destruction washed over them, leaving them weeping and broken on the floor of a luxury ballroom they could no longer afford to stand in. Audrey watched her parents collapse, her face a mask of total, horrified confusion. The fairy tale she had aggressively stolen from me was violently dissolving into a nightmare. She stepped towards Spencer, her hands shaking as she reached out to grab his arm. Spencer, baby, what is happening? Audrey cried, her voice trembling with fragile panic. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them about the offshore accounts. Tell them about the millions we have saved for the baby. Spencer turned his manic, furious gaze onto Audrey. The man she had betrayed me, for the man she believed was her wealthy knight in shining armor, looked at her with pure, blazing contempt. Without a single word of warning, Spencer raised his hand and slapped Audrey across the face. The sound of the impact echoed like a gunshot through the ballroom. The crowd gasped collectively, stepping back in unified horror. Audrey cried out, stumbling backward from the sheer force of the blow. Her hand flew to her rapidly reddening cheek, tears spilling over her expensive makeup as she stared at him in utter disbelief. You stupid, naive bitch! Spencer screamed, advancing on her, pointing an aggressive finger inches from her face. There are no millions. There is no fairy tale. The loan sharks are coming to kill me, and the feds have my accounts. But I am not going down for this. I am not rotting in a federal cell. Audrey sobbed, backing away from him, her heavily pregnant form trembling uncontrollably. But you said we were partners. She wept. You said those documents were for our future. Spencer let out a harsh, manic laugh. Partners. You were a convenient idiot, Audrey. I used your name. I used your signature. I opened every single illegal money laundering account under your social security number. You signed every wire transfer transferring stolen corporate funds. On paper, you are the mastermind. You are the one holding the bag. You are going to federal prison in my place, and I am taking whatever cash is left in this room and getting on a plane tonight. Audrey's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the stage, her sequined gown pooling around her, as she clutched her stomach, weeping hysterically. The sheer weight of her catastrophic foolishness crushed her into the floor. She had traded her sister her dignity and her entire future for a criminal who had actively, deliberately framed her for federal felonies. I stood at the base of the stage watching the absolute destruction of the people who had tried to destroy me. There was no joy in it. There was only a profound clinical satisfaction. The poison they had brewed had finally poisoned them. Then a sound pierced through the heavy walls of the ballroom. It started as a distant wail, rapidly multiplying and escalating in volume until the shrieking sound of dozens of police sirens surrounded the Grand Monarch Hotel. Red and blue emergency lights began flashing wildly through the massive panoramic windows, painting the terrified faces of the society guests in strobing, violent colors. Spencer froze his head, snapping toward the entrance. His eyes wide with animalistic panic darted toward the side exits. He turned to run, abandoning his pregnant fiancée and my weeping parents on the stage floor. He did not make it 3 steps. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom were violently kicked open. A team of 20 federal agents dressed in tactical black windbreakers, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI, swarmed into the room. They moved with terrifying coordinated efficiency, fanning out and instantly securing every single exit. "Nobody move," a voice roared over a bullhorn. Special Agent Vance strode directly down the center of the crimson carpet, his gold badge catching the chandelier light. He locked eyes with Spencer, who was frozen near the edge of the stage. Spencer Hayes Vance commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering. Get on the ground, now." Spencer hesitated, glancing wildly for an escape route that did not exist. 2 tactical agents rushed the stage, tackling him hard to the floor. Spencer grunted in pain as his face was pressed firmly into the carpet, his arms violently wrenched behind his back. The distinct, sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed across the stage. Vance stepped up onto the stage, bypassing my weeping parents and walking directly toward Audrey. Audrey was curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably, her makeup ruined, her fairy tale completely dead. "Audrey Adams," Vance said, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and federal money laundering. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Audrey shrieked, struggling as 2 female agents pulled her to her feet. "No, no, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face as they forced her arms backward. "I did not know. He tricked me. I am pregnant. You cannot do this." As the agents marched Audrey down the steps of the stage, she locked eyes with me. I stood perfectly still, my midnight blue gown immaculate, my expression completely unbothered. The arrogant, entitled sister who had mocked me, stolen my husband, and attempted to blackmail me into giving up my home was now a terrified, weeping criminal being paraded in front of Seattle's elite. Natalie Audrey screamed, thrashing against the federal agents, her voice raw with desperation. "Natalie, please help me. Tell them I am innocent. Tell them I am your sister. Use your lawyers. Please, Natalie, save me." The agents dragged her past me, her expensive perfume mixing with the sharp scent of panic and sweat. I did not move a single inch. I simply tilted my head, my crimson lips curving into a slow, chilling smile. I looked directly into her terrified, pleading eyes. "Remember to wear a warm coat, little sister," I said, my voice soft but slicing cleanly through the chaos of the ballroom. Federal prisons are very cold this time of year. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung shut behind the marching federal agents, entirely cutting off the chaotic screams of my sister and the frantic, panicked murmurs of the Bellevue elite. I did not stay to watch the caterers nervously pack up the ruined caviar or listen to the wealthy guests furiously demand their cash envelopes back from the seized gift table. I simply turned on my heel and walked out the side exit of the Grand Monarch Hotel. Jamal and Nicole flanked me like a fiercely loyal royal guard, our footsteps echoing perfectly in sync against the polished marble floors. The cool, crisp night air of the city hit my face, washing away the toxic, desperate stench of my former life. The trap had sprung with absolute flawless precision. There was nothing left for me to do but watch the magnificent catastrophic fallout. The federal justice system moved with ruthless mechanical efficiency. Spencer Hayes had built his entire pathetic identity on the grand illusion of being the smartest man in the room, but standing in front of a federal judge, he was rapidly reduced to a stammering, sweating coward. His highly publicized trial was a spectacular media circus. The prosecution utilized the exact forensic binders my team had meticulously compiled to dismantle his weak defense piece by piece. Spencer desperately tried to throw everyone else under the bus, including his own underground associates, but the digital paper trail was undeniably absolute. The sentencing hearing was brief, cold, and incredibly brutal. The federal judge looked down from the bench with undisguised disgust, explicitly condemning Spencer for his predatory greed, before handing down a crushing mandatory 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There would be no early parole for good behavior. There would be no comfortable country club prison. Spencer was violently stripped of his bespoke tailored suits and locked inside a bleak concrete cell, permanently erasing his arrogant smirk. He was finally exactly where he belonged, entirely powerless and completely forgotten. Audrey faced a remarkably different kind of spectacular ruin. Because she was heavily pregnant and ultimately agreed to a plea deal cooperating fully against Spencer, the federal prosecutors decided against seeking immediate prison time. She narrowly avoided a concrete cell, but she was slapped with 5 years of incredibly strict federal probation. However, the legal system was the absolute least of her punishments. Her highly anticipated social death was instantaneous and absolute. The wealthy high society friends she had so desperately tried to impress abandoned her overnight, blocking her number and pretending they had never met her. Her name became completely toxic in every circle of the city. With all of her banking assets seized by the government to pay federal restitution, Audrey was left entirely penniless. The entitled woman who had continuously sneered at my career and blindly plotted to steal my home was forcefully evicted from her luxury rental. Desperate, terrified, and completely broke, she was forced to take a minimum-wage job working the graveyard shift at a run-down budget motel located on the dangerous outskirts of the city. Her nightly routine now consisted of scrubbing filthy toilets, hauling heavy trash bags, and pushing a broken mop bucket down dimly lit hallways to barely afford basic groceries for her impending child. The sparkling, glamorous fairy tale she had aggressively stolen from me had violently dissolved into the harsh, unforgiving reality of cheap bleach and aching bones. My parents, however, faced the most pathetic and deeply satisfying ending of all. Their entire arrogant entitlement had been funded by Spencer's stolen money, and when those illegal accounts were frozen by the federal government, they were left staring into an abyss of absolute financial zero. Without the $1.5 million Spencer had stolen and gambled away, the bank immediately foreclosed on their heavily mortgaged suburban house. Their leased luxury cars were abruptly repossessed from their driveway in the middle of the afternoon. Stripped of their unearned wealth, they were forced to pack their few remaining cheap possessions into black plastic garbage bags. They relocated to a decaying, mold-infested apartment complex in the absolute worst slum district of the city. Their former country club associates treated them like a highly contagious disease. They had traded their basic morality for the cheap illusion of wealth and ended up trapped in a roach-infested nightmare with peeling wallpaper and the constant sound of police sirens wailing outside their single cracked window. One rainy Tuesday evening, my private phone buzzed with a frantic, desperate voicemail. It was my mother weeping hysterically into the receiver. She begged for my forgiveness, pleading for me to let them move into one of my residential buildings. She cried about the biting cold, the humiliation, and how they had made a terrible mistake. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not even listen to the end of her pathetic performance. I simply pressed delete, contacted my cellular service provider, and permanently disconnected that old phone number. They were absolute ghosts to me now, permanently exorcised from my reality. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different. The Seattle air was sharp and invigorating as I stood on the expansive glass-enclosed rooftop terrace of the Nova Horizon corporate headquarters. The evening breeze swept across the magnificent skyline, gently ruffling the hem of my tailored, immaculate white blazer. Beside me stood Nicole and Jamal. Through the fire and chaos of the past year, they had proven themselves to be infinitely more than just my legal and financial team. Nicole had officially become the fiercely protective older sister I always deserved, and her husband Jamal was the loyal, brilliant brother-in-law who had actively helped me construct an impenetrable fortress. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a true chosen family, bound by absolute loyalty and mutual respect. We raised our crystal glasses together, the crisp, incredibly expensive vintage champagne, catching the fading golden light of the setting sun. We were celebrating the absolute finalization of our newest and most aggressive corporate acquisition. Nova Horizon, LLC, had just officially absorbed the largest commercial real estate portfolio in the downtown district. I was no longer just a wealthy, silent investor hiding behind a corporate shell. I was the undisputed apex predator of the city's real estate market, commanding an empire worth hundreds of millions. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of champagne, looking down at the sprawling grid of city lights rapidly flickering to life far below my feet. The city looked like a massive, glittering chessboard, and I held all the winning pieces. My private encrypted phone buzzed softly in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a direct message from Julian Vance, a wildly successful international property developer and my newest corporate partner. The text was simple but incredibly loaded with electric promise. The merger is complete. Dinner in Paris this weekend to celebrate. My private jet is waiting. I smiled, feeling the thrilling, intoxicating rush of a brand new, completely unburdened chapter opening up before me. It was a chapter entirely dictated by my own terms, filled with genuine respect, absolute unyielding power, and breathtaking high-stakes romance. I reached deep into the silk pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small, dull object. It was the cheap, generic gold wedding ring Spencer had given me over a decade ago. I had kept it securely locked away as a physical reminder of my own past weakness, of the woman who had once allowed herself to be diminished. I held the cold metal between my manicured fingers for a fleeting second, feeling absolutely nothing for the pathetic man rotting in a federal cell who had given it to me. With a casual, elegant flick of my wrist, I tossed the ring into a nearby stainless steel trash receptacle. The hollow, echoing clink of the metal hitting the bottom sounded exactly like the final period at the end of a very long, exhausting sentence. I turned my back on the trash bin, leaving the absolute last remnant of my old life behind. I walked toward the glass edge of the terrace, standing proudly between Nicole and Jamal, looking out over the glittering, unstoppable empire I had built entirely with my own two hands. They stripped me of a fake home, so I bought the entire city. That is exactly how the game is played.